démocratique et des droits de l'homme, la représentante pour la liberté des médias, la haute commissaire pour les minorités nationales, ainsi que les missions sur le terrain pour leur professionnalisme et engagement continu dans la promotion du respect des droits de l'homme, de la démocratie et de l'état de droit. Dans un espace où de nombreux défis persistent quant à la mise en œuvre des engagements adoptés, la présidence suisse est convaincue de l'importance de leur mandat et réitère son plein soutien de leurs activités. Nos progrès dans la dimension humaine ne se comptent pas au nombre de nouveaux engagements adoptés au niveau politique. Ils sont mesurés à l'aune du travail précieux et indispensable fourni par cette institution dans toutes les régions de l'OSCE. Cette année, les institutions ont, encore une fois, prouvé qu'elles pouvaient répondre rapidement à toute situation critique et imprévue. Les institutions sont le visage de l'organisation et méritent tout notre soutien. Mesdames, Messieurs, laissez-moi maintenant vous adresser quelques remarques plus personnelles. C'est la 5e année consécutive que je suis ici, le 3e lundi de septembre, pour l'ouverture de la réunion sur la mise en œuvre des engagements concernant la dimension humaine. Je reviens année après année parce qu'il s'agit traditionnellement de la plus importante réunion de la dimension humaine, parce que cet événement reste le seul qui permette aux États participants de faire le point sur la mise en œuvre des engagements auxquels ils sont souscrits, parce que c'est le lieu où nous pouvons avoir un dialogue ouvert et franc avec tous les partenaires. Je reviens également car je sais que les panélistes seront intéressants et que je rencontrerai chaque jour lors des side events des défenseurs des droits de l'homme qui s'engagent sur le terrain pour mettre en œuvre les principes que nous discutons dans cette enceinte aujourd'hui. Toutefois, ça serait mentir de dire que je ne vois pas les dysfonctionnements de cet événement année après année. En effet, le format de l'événement, la qualité des discussions, la réduction du temps de parole, l'omniprésence de certaines organisations non gouvernementales et l'absence d'autres, ou encore l'insuffisance de dialogue constructif et d'échange de bonnes pratiques en plénière, mériterait une réflexion. Moderniser cet événement et la dimension humaine, voilà ce qu'on entend dans les couloirs et quelquefois en plénière. Vous n'êtes pas sans savoir que je me suis personnellement impliqué pour mener à bien le processus de renforcement des événements de la dimension humaine. Malgré nos efforts pendant plusieurs années, aucun consensus n'a pu être trouvé. Je réitère ici ce que nous avons dit précédemment. La Suisse est prête à s'engager pour la modernisation de ces événements et en particulier la réunion sur la mise en œuvre des engagements concernant la dimension humaine. Il est de notre devoir en tant qu'État participant et d'autant plus en tant que présidence en exercice de donner les moyens à cette organisation d'avancer. Une modernisation des événements n'est qu'une étape dans cette entreprise. Donner les moyens à l'organisation de répondre aux situations dans l'espace OSCE passe par l'adoption dans les délais d'un budget adéquat. Depuis 5 ans, le budget est approuvé avec une croissance nominale nulle. Derrière cette élégante formule de Zero Nominal Growth se cache purement et simplement une baisse du budget. Et si la promotion de la dimension humaine est souvent au cœur des débats des négociations du budget, l'organisation ne pourra continuer à fonctionner dans aucune dimension dans ces conditions. L'année 2014 a rappelé le rôle que joue l'OSCE dans les processus de promotion de la paix, médiation, démocratisation, promotion des droits de l'homme et de l'état de droit. Il est nécessaire de s'éloigner de ce Zero Nominal Growth et d'adopter un budget crédible qui permette des réponses telles que celles attendues par une organisation régionale au titre de l'article 8 de la Charte des Nations Unies. En 1975, à Helsinki, ou au début des années 90, la CSCE a su se réinventer. s'est équipé pour relever les défis et avait une vision. En 2010, à Astana, nous avons réaffirmé nos engagements. L'année 2014 nous met face à nos responsabilités, que ce soit dans la dimension humaine ou ailleurs. C'est notre rôle de donner les moyens à cette organisation de répondre aux défis actuels à l'aube des 40 ans de l'organisation. Nous avons une excellente opportunité de nous y atteler dans cette année où l'OSCE se retrouve au centre de l'attention de la politique internationale. Et vous savez aussi bien que moi qu'une fin à Zero Normal Growth n'est possible politiquement que si toute l'organisation en profite. La réclamer uniquement pour la dimension humaine ne suffira pas. Je vous remercie de votre attention et vous souhaite à toutes et à tous une réunion constructive.
Merci, cher Thomas. Merci pour vos mots à propos de la présidence suisse de l'OSCE et surtout pour toute l'importance et l'attention que vous attachez à la modernisation également de cet événement qui est un landmark event. And that brings me, of course, then to our next intervention, Pavel Wierdiak, on behalf of the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Poland.
Mr. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you here in Warsaw on behalf of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland to this year's Human Dimension Implementation meeting. Allow me to extend a special welcome to the distinguished heads of the OEC institutions, the Parliamentary Assembly, representative of the Swiss chairmanship, and our keynote speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, for some years now, the worsening human rights situation in the OEC area has become a major theme raised during the implementation meetings by a number of delegations and invited guests. What concerned us is also the lack of constructive approach during discussions on the implementation meeting agenda and the inability to reach a consensus on new issues like the freedom of speech in cyberspace. Unfortunately, these are not the only issues that will be absorbing us this year. We are confronted with the most serious crisis in the OEC area in years. Since the beginning of the crisis in Ukraine, we have seen serious violation of rules of international law, leading to deterioration of security conditions and mutual trust in Euro-Atlantic area. In order to rebuild them, we need to find a peaceful and lasting solution to the crisis in line with the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. The OEC occupies a significant place in this regard. The organization has reaffirmed its important role in the face of the crisis. Moreover, it demonstrated that it possesses useful mechanism in order to play this role. In this regard, the efforts undertaken by the Swiss chair were no doubt of key importance. I also wish to emphasize the role played by a special monitoring mission, which has enabled us to observe the situation and help the international community to react to the changing circumstances. The contribution made by the Human Rights Assessment Mission and the other activities in monitoring presidential elections cannot be overestimated. We also wish to express our appreciation to the representative on freedom of media for her work in monitoring freedom of speech in Ukraine and for her relentless condemnation of instances of its restriction. Ladies and gentlemen, the OEC overall security concept assumes that the observance of human rights and democratic rule is a key condition of friendly relations between states. The events of the last few months in Ukraine have proven how very true this concept is. They demonstrate that whenever attempts are made to restrict freedom of speech and the activities of civil society, media pluralism gives way to government propaganda. This also leads to lesser government accountability and to the government not keeping to its end of the social contract. Very often, disrespect to own society, rule of law and democracy, consequently, translates into action undertaken at international level. Mr. Chair, irrespective of external circumstances, the implementation meeting remains the fundamental mechanism used to verify the execution of commitments undertaken in the human dimension and an important instrument of promoting democracy and human rights in Euro-Atlantic area. Its importance is due to the large participation and full commitment of non-governmental organizations. I would like to express my appreciation for the OEC Swiss Chairman for its relentless efforts that have ultimately led to the adoption of the meeting's agenda and made the meeting possible. Our approval for the activities of the Chair is obviously based on much wider grounds. We fully share its conviction that commitments in the third dimension have to be better implemented. We also support giving the priority this year to counteracting torture and to the situation of human rights defenders. We greatly value the Bern Conference devoted to this subject matter, as well as its help in preparing and publishing the guidelines on the protection of human rights defenders. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now direct a few words to the organizers of our conference, the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. It should be given credit for preparing the conference in difficult circumstances because of the late adoption of the agenda. In turn, the guidelines I have mentioned before are an excellent example of the Office's right-on-target reaction to the current human rights situation. In this context, I would like to wish Mr. Link, the new audio director, who has been in the office for less than 3 months, perseverance and many accomplishments in leading the office. In closing, I would like to draw your attention to a side event organized by the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs devoted to the Warsaw Dialogue for Democracy. The Warsaw Dialogue initiative, whose next edition will be held in less than a month, was born out of a conviction that in order to promote democracy and human rights, a wide spectrum of instruments must be used, and civil society should receive constant support. I invite you to take part in this event on October the 1st, and I invite you to take part in our reception today, traditionally organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to celebrate opening of our meeting, but also to celebrate our victory last night. I wish you interesting and fruitful proceedings. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, also for the invitations for the different ones. Now, please, the floor will be to Dunja Mijatovic, OSCE's representative on the freedom of the media.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's wonderful to be here and to have you with us at the very beginning of this extremely important event. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, distinguished representatives of civil society coming from all parts of the OSCE region. I would like to start this very brief speech with a quote that I also used when I presented my regular report to the Permanent Council in November last year, because I think, in a way, we keep repeating ourselves on many issues that are related to human dimension. I will start with a quote that says, "The more things change, the more they stay the same." When Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Alphonse Karr penned this epigram in 1849, he no doubt had in mind some of the typical madness displayed by mankind as it keeps repeating the mistakes of the past. Dressed up differently, perhaps, but in reality the same evil result being played out time and time again. And it is very much related to our right to free expression, free flow of information, and our right to listen, to agree, to disagree, to provoke, and to say things that many do not like. And in this room, this is the 5th time I have the honor to talk about these issues and to see in which way we can go, or we should go, since the role you gave me is to remind you what should be done, and also to criticize you if I see that you are not doing it in a very good way. And unfortunately, I do it too often. I will briefly spell out my views. At the end of the day, there is no more effective way to restrict free media, free expression, and the free flow of information than resorting to physical and emotional violence and threats against journalists. We gathered here this month against the backdrop of conflict taking place in Ukraine, and I ask ourselves what it means for the OSCE as an entity, as a whole, and what it means to the independent institutions like my own, ODIHR, HCNM, that are charged with assisting participating states with their responsibilities in the human dimension. My office finds itself fully engaged in Ukraine. We have many roles in that country, from providing experts, support and advice on media law issues to chronicling and promoting the rights of media in conflict situations. Indeed, the Ukrainian conflict almost provides a blueprint for what the Office of the Representative is meant to do. From the first moment of the Maidan events, my office provided a constant watch on the activities of journalists. We advised on the dangers of reporting in times of crisis and in times of civil disobedience, and we called on the authorities to respect and protect the right of reporters to do their job freely and under safe conditions. We pointed out that broadcast operations were not the spoils of the war and could not be arbitrarily shut down or have their programming altered based on who had physical control of the switch. We have brought together representatives of media organizations reporting on the conflict in the effort to reach a common understanding of their roles, to promote confidence building, and to promote the highest professional standards. We have worked with the executive and legislative branches of the government to ensure that the media law environment overall is receptive and not hostile to free media and free expression. And finally, we have worked tirelessly in all our actions to be accurate and fair and point out that it is not a question of one group's rights versus another, but it's about the application and defense of the universal rights of free media and free expression that guide my office's work. The use of propaganda in times of conflict has the effect of nothing less than throwing gasoline off an open flame. And in my view, the behavior of state-owned and state-controlled media in the conflict has been exceptionally reprehensible. What can be done? Apparently calling on the better nature of those involved will not work. They continue to broadcast every day. It leads us to making sure that there are several voices that can be heard and there is more, not less information to work with. That and the informed media, literate population that can make rational and not emotional choices may dampen the flames that propagandists spew. But is that enough? Are we going to get there where we all want to go, in the societies that still, I repeat, call themselves democracies? That's what I heard when I came to this organization. This is a family of democracies. And this family is still imprisoning journalists, beating them on the streets, harassing, threatening them and their families. I will not name countries today, I will leave it for tomorrow when we have a date that is dedicated to media freedom and freedom of expression within the OSCE region. But I cannot address you today at a plenary without mentioning this. At the end, I would just like to say that it is with this in mind that, once again, I'm very glad to be here. where it is in a way our job to test how well the organization and its participating states are faring and living up to the commitments they have made over the last 4 decades. You can see from events in Ukraine that we have a long road to make and long road to travel. But this does not mean that we should stop trying as an institution to assist in living up to their commitments and assisting states to living up to their commitments. It only means that this institution, along with the other two, is more important and valuable than ever in the drive to have this organization meet its goals. I look forward to our work tomorrow when we cover very different issues that command our attention now and its foreseeable future, including the protection and safety of journalists, internet freedom, and many other issues that are of extreme importance. I will also say that, in my view, based on the experience I gained in this past 5 years, almost 5 years in this organization, that I can only repeat what I already knew, but it just now probably seen with a very different eyes when we look at everything that is happening within the region and beyond, that repression creates more repression, obstructions, that restriction of speech creates also people that want to fight these restrictions. And any government that would like to do things in order to make their societies better should think twice before they continue repressing and restricting free speech and free media in their countries. I look forward, as I said, to tomorrow, and I trust that you will find the discussion tomorrow lively and very open, because we will also have present more representatives of the civil society, I hope, and we will also have possibility to look at certain cases that we raised in a last period. All of this means that we do live in interesting times, and whether this is whether that is a course or not, I'm sure you will agree that the issues we will confront are big and the problems are getting bigger. We should not wait, and I would like to hear less pledges from the government and less requests from the government that we should slow down and that we need more time. I think we are already late. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dunja. Thanks, by the way, also for the very, very good cooperation you are having here in front of you, 3 heads of institutions. The next one, of course, to follow now with Astrid Thors as the High Commissioner of OSCE on National Minorities. And I just want to thank at this moment the 2 colleagues for the excellent cooperation between the institutions, because cooperation is crucial. Thank you, and the floor is to you, Astrid.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Michael. Excellencies, dear representatives of civil society, ladies and gentlemen, all dear friends. Also for me, it's a great pleasure to be back here in Warsaw. Now it's my 2nd Human Dimension implementation meeting. I want to thank the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and certainly ODIHR for hosting us and ODIHR for all the preparations. And in spite of all these nice words that we have sent towards each other with Dunja and Michael, I think I want just to stress how much I look forward to the good cooperation with the new director, Michael, and all the best for you for taking up the new post. As you noticed, we have already a good cooperation between the institutions, and I'm certain that that will continue both on a leaders level and between the offices as it has been for a long time. But unfortunately, times force us also to go to basics, really to go to basics. And before I briefly introduce next week's topics, as next Monday will be devoted to national minorities, I also need to remind you about the background given to my institution at the Helsinki summit in 1992. There, the participating states decided to create the High Commissioner on National Minorities with the role to provide early warning and, as appropriate, early action in regard to tensions involving national minority issues that have a potential to develop into a conflict. The mandate of the High Commissioner was drawn up as a response to the interethnic conflicts that occurred at the end of the Cold War. The High Commissioner is essentially an instrument of conflict prevention, providing early warning and early action. If I may also continue to cite the final document in this Helsinki summit called The Challenges of Change, and this is what I mean by the basics. It was acknowledged that Europe was faced with challenges and opportunities, but also with serious difficulties and disappointments. That time, the conflicts in the former Republic of Yugoslavia were in the minds of the leaders. In the words of the final document, for the first time in decades, we are facing warfare in the CSC region. The loss of life, human misery, involving huge numbers of refugees, have been the worst since the Second World War. Today, regrettably, we are again facing grave challenges in our region with the conflict in Ukraine, the situation on the Crimean Peninsula, the serious tensions we are faced with, and include with human losses, refugees, human suffering. I saw some of that suffering last week. What should our response be? The answer, of course, is in the implementation in good faith of the commonly agreed rules and commitments, and in genuine cooperation, not in confrontation and provocations. States should follow the rules and principles established in international law instruments and commitments, also when dealing with the protection of persons belonging to national minorities. States should make good and fair use of all available international instruments to peacefully and effectively address possible disputes and to avert conflict. In particular, I need and I would like to highlight the main principles of the 2008 Bolzano-Boston recommendations on national minorities in interstate relations developed by my institution and by my highly regarded predecessor. They are highly relevant in today's context. All necessary things are three. So first, the respect for and protection of minority rights is primarily the responsibility of the state where the minority resides. Second, human rights, including minority rights, are a matter of legitimate concern to the international community. And third, there is a broad range of international and bilateral instruments that participating states can use to address such concerns, which they should do with full respect of the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and good neighborly relations. Although a state may have a legitimate interest to support persons of a shared ethnicity living abroad, this does not entitle or imply in any way a right under international law to exercise jurisdiction over these persons. At the same time, it does not preclude the state from granting certain benefits to its kin residing abroad, but this assistance should comply with the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and good neighborly relations. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, the experience of my institutions shows that human rights, including minority rights, are essential tools for conflict prevention. We are also talking about the conflict cycle repeating if we are not doing the prevention in a proper way. This is also why the topics on the agenda for the special day next week are highly relevant to my conflict prevention mandate. They are also interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Full and effective participation of persons belonging to national minorities is also enhanced by education for all these persons, interlinked, interdisciplinary conflict prevention. How we manage our increasingly diverse societies will determine our future and indeed our collective security. In this respect, I should highlight once more the responsibility of the state towards its own population and as an actor in the international community. Just as at the beginning of the 1990s, there is a pressing need for states to strengthen security instruments in a holistic way, including all aspects of human security, including also in the area of minority rights. Dear friends, we have a lot to discuss under the coming weeks. I will with intention listen to your debates and thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, dear Astrid Thors. And the floor will now be to the representative of the Secretary General of OSCE, by the way, who will be in person here for our closing meeting, the Secretary General. Today, we have the privilege to have with us Ambassador Adam Kopiatsky, Director of the OSCE Conflict Prevention Center. Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Since, as you said, Michael, Secretary General will join you for your final meeting, in my introductory remarks, so to say, I will focus rather on the conflict prevention perspective. The address of the CPC Director to HDIM has now become a tradition in its third year. This is certainly a strong indication of the cross-dimensional nature of our respective work and the resulting good cooperation that the CPC and the ODU continue to enjoy. And this is the first HDIM that takes place after you, dear Michael, assumed the responsibilities as the Director. It gives me additional pleasure to underline this very point. Needless to say, we at the CPC attach great importance to and take due account of the work done in the human dimension. As the most significant event of the year in the human dimension, the annual implementation assessment meeting provides all of us with a unique opportunity to review the broad set of commitments and activities in this field, while at the same time we look into possibilities of improving our common efforts. Many of the issues that you will address during the next 2 weeks do not only have direct relevance for the work we do at the CPC in conceptual terms, but also have significant impact on the ground, in particular for the work of our field operations. Therefore, we look forward to fruitful exchanges during this meeting in order to enhance our cooperation in the wide range of interconnected issues that are on the HDIM agenda. What makes our daily work at the CPC truly cross-dimensional is our function as the key link between the Secretariat and the field operations, mainly by providing extensive policy support. Human dimension is an important aspect of the work of the field missions, which cooperate closely on many issues with ODU, as well with High Commission on National Minorities and the Representative on Freedom of the Media. It is gratifying to note that this cooperation has proved beneficial not only for the field operations and the executive structures to properly carry out their mandates, but also for the societies that benefit directly from the results of this cooperation. As you are all aware, one very crucial aspect of our work at the moment relates to the crisis in and around Ukraine. This is where the CPC and all OSCE executive structures cooperate intensively in order to contribute to ongoing efforts to achieve sustainable peace and security. By the way, on the margins of that, let me tell you that our SMM, Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, has started yesterday midday to monitor the security zone established under the trilateral contact group. The comprehensive nature of the OSCE engagement in Ukraine since the beginning of the crisis has been a clear testimony to the fact that there is indeed great need for this close cooperation among OSCE executive structures covering various aspects of the human dimension work, as well as the Special Monitoring Mission on the ground. At the same time, the ongoing developments proved once again that we have to strengthen our early warning and conflict prevention capabilities in order to prevent escalations from occurring in the first place. There is also a clear need to improve our mediation capabilities to better support the parties in their settlement efforts. These are actually some of the key elements of the Ministerial Council Decision 311 on the conflict cycle, which outlines the framework of our efforts in early warning, conflict prevention and resolution, crisis management, and post-conflict rehabilitation. The CPC has been working intensively towards enhancing the OSCE toolbox across the conflict cycle in all of these areas, always with the understanding that a comprehensive cross-dimensional response is crucial to address the multifaceted causes of crises and conflicts, requiring an effective cooperation and coordination among all OSCE executive structures. Since its foundation, our organization has based itself on the understanding that sustainable peace and stability is not achievable without due respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. This understanding is now more valid than ever in addressing the current challenges across the OSCE area. Accountable and functioning democratic institutions are no doubt indispensable elements of an environment where those rights and freedoms are guaranteed. Not least for these reasons, we have been grateful for the important contribution of the ODIHR to the CPC work in all phases of the conflict cycle. I'm sure that our mutually beneficial cooperation will continue on the broad range of issues on your agenda, ranging from fundamental freedoms and rule of law to tolerance and non-discrimination and violence against women and children. In the upcoming period ahead, we will continue to work closely with ODIHR and take due account of human dimension-related aspects of our work, while we continue our efforts to strengthen our capabilities across the conflict cycle. If the human dimension experts in this forum also keep in mind the CPC work in their relevant discussions, they will certainly contribute to our collective thinking on how to better address the ongoing challenges in the OSCE area. Therefore, I encourage all of you to keep the interconnected nature of our work in mind while you discuss the wide range of issues on the agenda. On a personal note, with my term of duty in the CPC coming to an end next year, I can tell you that from my perspective, the Human Dimension implementation meeting is truly the most important meeting in the Human Dimension because it focuses on implementation. And from my own experience over the last 3.5 years, I can say that we still, much too often, face situations where we are told that since relevant laws have been passed and relevant institutions have been established, then that means that the record, the human rights implementation record, is perfect. We have to continue to question this logic. We have to continue to try to change this logic, because this logic reminds me very much of a certain well-known Latin saying, and would need the help of interpreters. In Latin, it says, "Qui bene bibit, bene dormit, qui bene dormit, non peccat, qui non peccat, sanctus est, ergo qui bibit, sanctus est." And it is not true. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adam. We let some time for the translators to find the right clue. Thank you very much for your insightful statements, and also for the cooperation with CPC in this case, and also with you personally. Now, I said to you, well, we have the heads of institutions here. Another important institution is the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, because what we do must be and can only be efficient if we have parliamentary support in our participating states. Therefore, it's a pleasure for me here to welcome Mehmet Sevgi Kurgulolu, and he will have the statement on behalf of the President of the Parliamentary Assembly. Mehmet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to once again represent the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly at this key event in the OSCE calendar. I take this opportunity to welcome the new Director of ODIHR, Mr. Link. We look forward to continuing and expanding on the close cooperation that we had with your predecessor. And I applaud the organizers for their work in bringing us all together. The topic could not be more important, as we must maintain focus on the implementation of our commitments. Without effective implementation, the hard work of our governments in agreeing commitments is wasted and perhaps even insulted. As members of Parliament that are regularly held to account through elections, we in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly are keenly aware of the need to deliver on our commitments. I would like to take this opportunity not only to update you on some of the recent work of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in the human dimension, but also to offer some thoughts regarding the implementation of commitments. In our annual session in Baku 3 months ago, OSCE parliamentarians particularly voiced their concern on issues related to the rights of migrants and refugees. In our Baku Declaration, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly made it clear that it is the high time for OSCE participating states to prioritize the protection of migrants' rights, and in particular, the rights of labor migrants and asylum seekers. These segments of society are far too often neglected, and we must help them to come out of the shadows with human dignity. I was pleased to note that there was broad recognition from MPs from all parts of the OSCE region that these are serious issues that must be addressed. As a result, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly strongly condemned hate crimes against any migrant and called for the investigation of crimes and protection of victims, regardless of their status in the host country. In Baku, OSCE parliamentarians also indicated their resolve to address the issue of political prisoners in the OSCE area with openness and candor. While the topic is sensitive, a culture of impunity works against us, and indeed against the spirit of Helsinki Final Act. Specific recommendations are represented to OSCE ministers, including a call to avoid the political use of Interpol red notices. The persistence of the persecution of people based on their political views goes against the very fundamental principles that underpin our organization going back to the days of Helsinki. Parliamentarians also took the time to again address issues related to tolerance and to combating trafficking and torture. The broad consensus achieved on these issues within our Assembly should not be allowed to hide the fact that these problems persist within the OSCE. We all have to work to do in this regard. With reference to trafficking, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly presented some clear and practical recommendations related to the protection of victims, particularly when persecuting perpetrators. The need for a proactive commitment by participating states to combat torture was also underlined, reiterating the concern the MPs have regarding the persistence of torture in the OSCE region. Needless to say, the situation in Ukraine and the significant human rights challenges in that country was also brought into focus. On a humanitarian level, the tragedy that took place on Odessa on May 2nd was also highlighted by parliamentarians in Baku, when we called upon the authorities of Ukraine to carry out an open investigation. Parliamentarians passed a specific resolution entitled "The Clear, Gross and Unconcerned Violations of Helsinki Principles by the Russian Federation," which brought both political and human rights concerns forward. With thousands dead from the ongoing fightings, more than 1 million displaced, the human tragedy of this crisis cannot be ignored. I myself visited Ukraine in December 2013 and expressed my solidarity with Ukrainian people in Maidan. There is an urgent need to address humanitarian disaster that has occurred as a result of conflict in Ukraine and to prevent further violence. OSCE's important role is recognized by all parties of the conflict, but we need to step up more our peace-building measures and other actions to ensure immediate impact on the ground. We need to address humanitarian disaster unfolding, especially now when winter season is not far away. In Baku, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly also offered a number of suggestions on how to improve the OSCE's effectiveness in implementing our human rights commitments. Most notable on this regard was the concern we expressed regarding the continuous reduction in the capacity of OSCE field operations to monitor and report on human rights issues. Over many years, the OSCE has established missions staffed with excellent professionals, well equipped to support participating states in many fields. Unfortunately, we have seen a trend through which the monitoring and reporting mandates, particularly to do with human rights, have been diminished and entire missions closed. OSCE parliamentarians have consistently and strongly advocated in favor of more robust field missions where much of the most important work of the OSCE takes place. In these missions, we have at our disposal an excellent tool to help with implementation of human rights commitments. For the benefit of all our citizens, we should make use of them. The important role that civil society plays in our work was also addressed when OSCE parliamentarians reiterated our call for the creation of a civil society board comprised of representatives of leading NGOs working on these OSCE issues. Civil society has always played a critical role in making this human dimension implementation meeting an interesting place for debate. Unfortunately, however, it is currently one of very few OSCE events where civil society plays such a central role and where representatives of governments come face to face with courageous individuals and groups who want to hold us all to account. Further development in this field would be of benefit to the OSCE as an institution and to our constituents, the populations of our all countries. We must all be open to improvements on how we deliver on our commitments. We owe it to our populations. Therefore, I want to once again reiterate the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly's long-standing recommendation to the OSCE Permanent Council on addressing human rights. We have recommended that the Permanent Council organize fortnightly meetings on human rights in a way that is open to the public and media and with the participation of civil society representatives. For regardless of how hard we all work, for these next 2 weeks and here in Warsaw, this HDIM should not be seen as a replacement for continuous monitoring of the implementation of OSCE human dimension commitments. Of course, monitoring of some of our key democratic commitments thus placed on a regular basis through OSCE election observation missions. As the basis for all of our representation, the role that elections play in our societies cannot be overstated. As politicians with our hands on the pulse of our populations, parliamentarians feel the importance of democratic institutions more than anybody else. Indeed, if democratic institutions fail, we are some of the first ones to feel the effects. As a publicly elected official myself, and as a person who has observed elections with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, it is a point of pride that we regularly point to our shortcomings whenever and wherever we see them, east or west of Vienna. There is no room for compromise on this issue of principle. Indeed, compromise in this field would present a serious setback for us all. Democratic values should not be open to compromise. The leadership role of OSCE parliamentarians in election observation, whose independence and political judgment brings added legitimacy, together with the expertise and data from ODR's long-term observers, provides a sound basis for the OSCE's monitoring activities. Ladies and gentlemen, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly has become a key place for debate on OSCE topics where each elected parliamentarian has a voice and a vote, regardless of what their government may say. I hope that the ideas that have come out of the OSCE parliamentary debates in Baku will now be addressed here with governments also taking a stand. An open airing of all opinions is critical if we are to find lasting solutions to the challenges that we all share. The Parliamentary Assembly will continue playing its part in the monitoring of human rights commitments, and you can count on us to continue to raise difficult issues that may otherwise remain stuck in the pipelines of diplomacy. Next week in Geneva, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly autumn meetings will give us the opportunity to further discuss the role of parliamentarians in addressing the new security challenges arising in the OSCE area. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear Mehmet, and also for highlighting the Baku Declaration, which I find is really a very important piece of work and which we, as least in ODIHR, of course, certainly will take up in our work. And looking forward to see you in Geneva for the fall meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, coming to my own contribution as ODIHR director in my own contribution today to you this morning after the opening, I'm certainly not the first who will say that this is a special year. The events of 2014 are certainly going to be remembered for many years to come, but there are also a number of historical anniversaries that occur in this year. Let's take a short look back in history. The Congress of Vienna, for example, was held almost exactly 200 years ago, in September 1814. While the outcome of the Congress is certainly not positively remembered, and at least not under the expectations of the human rights, it was rather a reactionary restorational event, but nevertheless it is by many historians that they consider this to be the birthplace of modern multilateral diplomacy. And indeed, this multilateral diplomacy lies also at the very heart of the OSCE. While attempts at that time in the Congress of Vienna to codify diplomatic immunity at the Congress in 1814 failed long ago, it was in the very same city that later the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations was negotiated. This highly important international treaty came into effect almost exactly 50 years ago, and to date it regulates the daily work of many of the people gathered here today. But the year 2014 must also be associated, and you know that, of course, with dates that are most tragic to remember. It was just a little bit more than 100 years ago when World War I started with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. This war marked the beginning of what the prominent historian Eric Hobsbawm called the short 20th century. From the beginning of World War I until the end of the Cold War, a time that will be remembered for some of the cruelest crimes, most cruel crimes against humanity ever committed. World War II, without any doubt the culmination point of these crimes, started almost exactly 75 years ago with the attack of Nazi Germany on Poland on September 1st, 1939. While some of this may seem very remote, none of these dates will ever lose their relevance. They remain relevant as important turning points in time that influenced the destinies and ended the lives of many millions of people. But they also stand as warning signs for the generations to come. And while many of the world's leaders publicly commemorated the victims of these wars in numerous ceremonies filled with words of grief and regret, people all over Europe and indeed the whole world are worried that the threat of war in Europe, long thought overcome on this continent, has returned. Even though the hope that the armed struggle we have all been so concerned about in the recent past is losing its intensity, with the ceasefire holding, and by the way, Adam Kopiratsky mentioned it, with the restless effort of all those involved, especially here from OSCE, in helping to control the ceasefire. With all that, of course, now hopefully losing its intensity, a fundamental conflict between the parties remains. And while this is not here the point or place to speculate about the roots of this conflict, I do believe that at the very heart of this struggle, as in all conflicts, is also a normative battle, a battle for values. When it is argued by some, as we have heard time and time again, that human rights, our core values, are nothing but a proxy used to destabilize governments, that efforts to improve the livelihood of religious, ethnic, or sexual minorities are, in fact, plots orchestrated from abroad to bring civil unrest, this only demonstrates that there is a fundamental misunderstanding as to what the values that underlie these efforts are about. The very concept of human rights, as defined by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and reaffirmed by numerous OSCE third dimension commitments, such as those agreed in the Helsinki Final Act of 75 or 90 document of the Copenhagen meeting on the Conference on the Human Dimension of the then CSCE, is and must be universally applicable. The idea that human rights could only be valid in one part of the world or could be used by one government against another is therefore, I think, based on a flawed premise. For human rights are rights serving to protect the individual against any government or any other entity infringing upon the individual's fundamental freedoms. They are rooted in values that are inherent to every human being, defending the individual from any abuse of power, no matter where and when. The real struggle, therefore, is certainly not between East and West, or North and South, or between whomever, but between those who abuse their power and those who exercise restraint in order to protect the individual's human rights. This is, in my eyes, very much what the third dimension is about. Ladies and gentlemen, ODIHR has, from its very beginnings, strived to protect and to serve exactly these rights of the individual. It is our daily work to support those who are threatened in their right to exercise their fundamental right to live free from discrimination on grounds of racial or ethnic origin, religious, political, or other opinion, as well as to foster respect for rule of law, democratic values, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of expression, thought, conscience, religion, or belief. We have, furthermore, with the 1994 Budapest document and the 2010 Astana commemorative declaration, committed ourselves to protect and support those who risk their safety and their lives to defend and to strive for the protection and realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms of others, in brief, of human rights defenders. These are people, the human rights defenders, who deserve our greatest respect. Individuals who face harassment, threats, and intimidation for devoting their time and energy to the promotion and protection of human rights. Human rights defenders' guidelines, developed and published under the auspices of my esteemed predecessor, Ambassador Janez Lenarčič, whom I want to thank in this place very, very much, not only for the most professional handover to me, of course, but also for his 6 years of work here for OSCE and for the commitments. These guidelines are an invaluable tool to support their laudable yet dangerous work. It is a privilege for me to continue this work in the time of my directorship with the translation also and distribution further of these guidelines. Ladies and gentlemen, the development of new technologies is rapidly changing the circumstances under which we all live, but also under which human rights defenders operate. On the one hand, the digital age offers incredible possibilities when it comes to the documentation of human rights violations. With smartphones and wireless internet access becoming increasingly present all over the OSCE area, everything can be photographed, recorded, and published for a worldwide audience to see within minutes. It has never been easier to spread the word about any abuse of power. Access to any kind of media and impartial information has never been more widespread. But the abuses of power, those who put the validity of human rights in question, can also make use of these new possibilities. With new technologies allowing to track all movements, to easily gather compromising information, and to infiltrate the spheres of privacy that are most intimate for each individual, we must step up our measures to protect ourselves and those who engage in protecting other people's rights. In order to prevent this from becoming a digital arms race, where only the stronger party will prevail, all participants must adhere to those basic rules we call human rights. For the right to privacy is as much of a human right as any other. And in any age where information becomes one of the most valuable commodities, where entire companies turn over billions purely based on their knowledge of people's consumer preferences or health records, we must be extremely vigilant as to how we treat and process these data. And it is nothing against techniques, nothing against progress, but it's about being vigilant to see all sides of these new developments. On the other hand, the rights of those who use these new technologies as a means to exercise their right to freedom of expression or association must also be protected. A blogger, for example, writing about the misconduct of a local administration deserves the same protection as a journalist working for a conventional media outlet. Given that an opinion expressed in written and disseminated on the internet may easily reach a larger audience, those who express their opinion online deserve, I think, very clearly the same amount of protection as those who do it offline. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom of expression is of the utmost importance for our concept of fundamental freedoms. Dunja already mentioned it in her statement. But sometimes the thin line between the expression of an opinion and hate speech is crossed. One of the areas where this may lead to particularly emotional outbursts is where it touches on questions of faith, and indeed we are, despite growing secularization, experiencing a surge of conflicts rooted in religion. Therefore, you will find, for example, also in what we present to you as ODIHR for future projects, also, for example, also projects concerning active fighting against jihadism, and here also ODIHR will be active in the future. But coming back to my speech, this does not only concern the aspect of freedom of belief, but also applies to situations where religion is used as a vehicle to exercise power over others or as a pretext to infringe on other people's rights. The long-standing commitments of the OSCE community on freedom of belief are still very far from being met. The religious communities all over the OSCE area still face restrictions with regard to their right to gather, worship, or register their legitimate activities. Our message in this respect is clear. We stand ready to protect those who want to believe and want to exercise their right to freedom of religion, but we are also ready to guarantee the right to have any belief, including those who have no spiritual belief at all. Ladies and gentlemen, I do know that some of the things I have said today were abstract, yes. Others, the more concrete ones, may be somewhat controversial. But controversy makes life more interesting. It is here also a place to exactly speak out these controversies in order to promote further what we have in OSCE and to discuss further together where maybe new commitments also would be needed and to see how existing commitments are being applied. I hope that we will have many more controversial debates, but productive debates over the next 2 weeks, debates where every voice can be heard and everybody can participate on an equal footing. In the following days, we will be able to discuss these and many other issues in 18 working sessions, covering the entire spectrum of OSCE human dimension commitments. There will furthermore be more than 80 side events, along with many other opportunities to have informal discussions with participants from the whole OSCE area. The goal of this human dimension implementation meeting, as it has been since our first meeting more than 20 years ago, is to conduct a peer review of the implementation of commitments among the participating states, to listen to the concerns and proposals from civil society, and to discuss the assessment of this implementation by ODIHR and other OSCE institutions, as well as field operations, whose role is to monitor, assist, and report to participating states according to their respective mandates. Ladies and gentlemen, coming to a close, let me just underline again that ODIHR has been very active in the monitoring the implementation of the human dimension commitments in a number of areas covered by our mandate. From elections to the fair trial rights and to freedom of peaceful assembly. By the way, currently we are working very closely with the Council of Europe, with the Venice Commission, which is about to have its anniversary meeting in Rome very soon, working for the future on a joint publication of guidelines for freedom of association. Thanks at that instance to the Council of Europe and to the very good cooperation with the Venice Commission. I appreciate that most participating states and have been open to our monitoring and increasingly so interested, of course, having cooperation with us, and even where controversial points are, we work together and try to come to a common ground and cooperation. We have been open to our monitoring, I would like to thank them for this and strongly encourage all participating states to use the opportunity and take further advantage of ODIHR's monitoring work as an offer to all participating states. Because only if we engage in an open dialogue, which is applying equal standards all over the OSCE area, we can find effective means to translate our commitments into meaningful realities for the individuals in the participating states, guaranteeing a life for each and every one of them based on the protection of their human rights, their freedom, and their individual human dignity. Thank you very much for your attention to my words, but now I have the pleasure to introduce you to our keynote speaker today, which will then, of course, be the last speaker from our side here at the podium, opening then for the statements from your sides as agreed. My pleasure is, of course, to welcome with us Mrs. Elisa Massimino, Human Rights First President and CEO of Human Rights First since some years. Human Rights First is one of the leading human rights advocacy organizations established in 1978. Human Rights First works in the United States and abroad to promote respect for human rights and the rule of law, grounded in belief that America's own performance on human rights is essential. The organization, I may say that, also challenges the United States very critically, very often also to live up to its ideals. Mrs. Massimino joined Human Rights First in 1991 and served as the organization's Washington director for more than a decade before being named chief executive in September 2008. Mrs. Massimino, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's an honor for me to be here today to help set the context for this important meeting. And it's a special pleasure for me to return to Warsaw. I was last here 24 years ago at a time of great promise and opportunity for Poland and other newly independent states, and this is where I began my work as a human rights activist. I returned home from that trip invigorated by the energy and optimism of the people that I met here. Shortly thereafter, I joined Human Rights First, an independent, non-governmental organization whose mission is to challenge the United States to live up to its ideals and advance the universal values of human rights. The world is very different and arguably more dangerous today than it was back then. It's not possible in my short time here this morning to address the many threats to peace, security, and human rights that challenge us today, but here is a snapshot. A war in Ukraine, now in a tenuous lull, threatens to unsettle all of Europe. A war in Syria has killed nearly 200,000 people and displaced more than half of the Syrian population and grinds on with no end in sight. Together with the long-standing mayhem in Iraq, Syria's war has bred a new threat that combines genocidal barbarism with social media savvy. And many people in the OSCE nations have more immediate woes: poverty, hunger, joblessness, and 6 years after the financial crisis, a profound lack of faith that their leaders can fix these problems. In this environment, hateful demagogues feed on misery and scapegoat vulnerable minorities. Refugees are the very embodiment of upheaval, a barometer, if you will, of distress. And there are more refugees in the world today than at any other time since World War II. Many of them, as you know, are finding their way to Europe and North America, where they often face hostility, discrimination, and even violence. I wish I could report that governments and political leaders are responding to these challenges with boldness, intelligence, and imagination. But too many leaders are undermining the very principles that make for healthy societies: freedom of religion, assembly and expression, protection of refugees, due process and the rule of law, and a vibrant civil society. To the short-sighted and ill-intended, rights are seen as expendable in times of crisis, but this is exactly backwards. It is by respecting rights that we find a pathway out of crisis. Governments around the world, not least of which my own, have cited the threat of terrorism to constrain liberty, accumulate power, and claim the need to maintain more and more secrecy. I'm not naive about the threat of terrorism. It is serious, and it presents its own challenge to human rights. But unless governments couple their resolve to meet these threats with an equal resolve to ground those efforts in respect for rights and freedoms, we will all lose. Counterterrorism efforts, whether well-intended or veiled executive power grabs, that are unmoored from human rights, tend to weaken democracies, strengthen autocracies, and perpetuate the conditions from which terrorist movements draw their strength. This is a long struggle. Today, there are high school students who were not yet born when the U.S. launched its so-called war on terror. That conflict spawned torture, indefinite detention, pervasive secrecy, invasive surveillance, and legally dubious drone strikes that have killed hundreds of civilians. President Obama took the important step of repudiating torture in the opening days of his first term, but Guantanamo, that site and symbol of abuse, remains an indelible stain on America's moral leadership. 154 prisoners languish there, including some scheduled for trial in military commissions that lack legitimacy. We at Human Rights First are pressing the Obama administration to end the failed experiment of Guantanamo, ensure the release of a Senate report on the CIA torture program, come clean about the rules that govern its use of drones for targeted killing, and address legitimate concerns about overly broad data collection and wholesale invasions of privacy that seem unrelated to addressing threats to national security. The world recently got a window into how the reflexive resort to military force risks infecting broader law enforcement tactics. In the aftermath of the police shooting of an unarmed black teenager by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri this summer, police used excessive force against protesters. The police department of this small town had militarized weapons as well as a militarized mindset, both products in part of the war on terrorism. By the time nations feel the need to resort to force to confront terrorism, the challenges are compounded. Counterterrorism strategies that rely too heavily on force have invariably led to human rights abuses, exacerbating the very conditions that give rise to terrorism and creating a vicious cycle that is difficult to break. Perpetual war without geographical limits, a declared enemy, and a sound legal foundation poses a real and present danger to all of our societies. Last year, President Obama declared his intention to move U.S. counterterrorism operations off of a war footing. He should use his speech at the UN this week to reaffirm that goal, and he should assure other nations that U.S. military action against ISIS will be tailored to meet that threat and does not represent an unbounded broadening of the use of military force as part of U.S. counterterrorism strategy. Meanwhile, in Russia, an increasingly authoritarian leader has used purported security threats as a pretext for cracking down on dissent, muzzling independent media, and intimidating civil society. A so-called foreign agents law has imperiled NGOs by restricting support from foreign sources. Several have been forced to shut down. A treason law has dangerously expanded the definitions of treason and espionage, leaving openings for abuse. Anti-extremism laws have been used to restrict rights both online and on the street. The government has persecuted independent journalists, whistleblowers, and activists, and President Putin has signed a harsh law that threatens the human rights of LGBT people. Russia is promoting its homophobic law as a model, as other countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, such as Belarus and Kyrgyzstan, consider their own anti-LGBT laws. The crackdown on NGOs also extends beyond Russia. Governments have used restrictions on foreign funding and other tactics to shut down NGOs in Azerbaijan, Belarus, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. These laws have a chilling effect on civil society wherever they exist. President Putin is cultivating a dangerous nationalism that is now used to justify the war he sponsored in Ukraine. And while Russia has a neo-Nazi problem of its own, President Putin uses exaggerated charges of anti-Semitism and fascism to delegitimize the Ukrainian government and whip up domestic support in Russia for intervention. All parties to the armed conflict in Ukraine, including Russia, must respect their international humanitarian law obligations in the conduct of hostilities and the protection of civilians, and there is evidence that they are all failing. But if Ukraine's fledgling democracy is imperiled, it's not entirely Russia's fault. Ukraine's leaders have yet to show a sufficient commitment to inclusive democratic governance. They have moved to ban the Communist Party, left the LGBT community in Ukraine, for example, and in Kiev feeling insecure, and have done little to earn public trust that it will end corruption and protect fundamental rights. The government should, for example, seek accountability for the killings that took place during the Maidan protests and pursue meaningful campaign finance reform. Ultimately, a rights-respecting democracy will provide the stability that Ukrainians need and that can deter Russian interference in the country. The more established democracies of Europe are facing their own challenges. In much of the continent, ultra-nationalist movements have risen on a tide of anti-immigrant sentiment, economic distress, and public anger at ruling elites. These movements have fomented hate that has sometimes led to violence. But economic distress doesn't fully explain the rise of hate parties. After all, the phenomenon predates the crash, and in some countries, severe joblessness has not spawned a resurgence of fascism. How governments navigate these shoals, or don't, makes a major difference in the outcome. The Jobbik Party in Hungary and Golden Dawn in Greece are two examples. Both parties demonize Jews, Roma, LGBT people, Muslims, and migrants, portraying the existence of minorities as a threat to their national, cultural, religious, or ethnic identities. These xenophobic, anti-EU, anti-NATO views have propelled them into their national parliaments and the European Parliament. One need not accept facile analogies to the 1930s to be alarmed by the resurgence of fascism in Europe. Yet the political leaders of both Hungary and Greece have not only tolerated these parties, they sometimes have empowered them. In Greece, Golden Dawn gained a foothold in virtually every level of government, including the police and the military, before the government finally charged its leaders with running a criminal organization bent on terrorizing migrants and minorities. The upcoming trial of Golden Dawn leaders is a critical opportunity to begin to stem this tide. To seize it, the government must ensure that the trial is credible and complies with international fair trial standards. In Hungary, where Jobbik won 20% of the vote last spring, Prime Minister Viktor Orban is playing a dangerous game. While ostensibly opposing Jobbik, he has tapped into the very hatred that is their lifeblood. He condemns anti-Semitism, yet he names his ambassador to Rome a well-known anti-Semite. The government's growing authoritarianism legitimizes Jobbik and itself poses a threat to the rights of Hungarians. The authorities have raided NGOs that accepted funds from Norway, branding them agents of foreign powers, and have put 13 NGOs deemed hostile to the government on a, quote, enemies list. Meanwhile, the government has restricted media freedoms and passed tax laws that seem designed to undermine foreign-owned media outlets. Prime Minister Orban's open declaration that Hungary will become a, quote, illiberal democracy, end quote, is a chilling prediction of a future inconsistent with the Helsinki principles. This is a bleak picture, no doubt, but there are bright spots. The Swedish Prime Minister's bid to defy the anti-immigrant tide and defend his country's tradition of openness. The determination of the U.S. Congress to publicly release details about the CIA's torture program so Americans and the rest of the world can know what really happened. The powerful joint statement after a recent spate of hate crimes against Jews of the French, German, and Italian foreign ministers condemning anti-Semitism. And everywhere, in every OSCE country, courageous activists working to make their societies freer, more inclusive, and more just. Still, the trends are alarming, and the dangers are undeniable. The good news is that we need not go searching for a roadmap. We know the route to peace and stability. It is set forth in the Helsinki Declaration of 1975, the OSCE's foundational document, where nations pledged to uphold human rights as the essential element to ensure peace, justice, and well-being. Despite that critical and hard-won insight, it is hard to dislodge the conventional wisdom that in times of insecurity, so-called soft concerns like human rights must take a back seat until more urgent needs are addressed. But time and again, we see the prescient wisdom of the Helsinki drafters. The solution to security challenges lies not in postponing action on human rights, but in doubling down on rights protection. The demonization of or neglect of minorities, the failure to ensure the safety and political participation of women, the crackdown on civil society who works to protect the rights of the vulnerable, these factors are both symptoms of and lead to broader insecurity. Many of the security challenges we face today are the result of erosion of or an all-out assault on human rights. That's why it's imperative that the OSCE participating states not sideline or soft pedal scrutiny of human rights, despite the security challenges. I leave you with a few concrete and modest recommendations for translating these challenges into opportunities. First, I encourage all governments to implement their obligations to promote tolerance and combat hate crime, including improving data collection, providing information to ODIHR, and inviting ODIHR to train their law enforcement officers. In that regard, I commend the Swiss chairmanship and the German Foreign Office for its hosting of an event in November to mark the 10th anniversary of the Berlin Declaration on Anti-Semitism. I encourage every participating state, including my own, to send a high-level representative. Now is a particularly important moment to demonstrate that hatred and intolerance have no place in Europe and North America, and that governments and civil society are committed to working together to combat it. Second, I want to highlight an issue that is central to all three OSCE dimensions: economic, security, and human rights, and that is protecting the rights of women. We know from empirical evidence that ensuring women's safety and equality promotes peace and security and strengthens economies. Violence against women, a serious problem in all OSCE states, prevents societies from realizing these benefits. Since the first OSCE action plan a decade ago, the consensus that women are both particularly vulnerable to violence and have a critical role to play in conflict resolution and peace building has only grown stronger. And at a time when the economies of the EU continue to struggle, women's participation, free from discrimination and violence, including domestic violence, is essential. The OSCE action plan is long overdue for an update, both to reflect new data and to share knowledge among and spur action in participating countries. I urge you to move forward with it. Finally, progress on rights is never made simply by reaffirming lofty principles, however important that is. I challenge each government represented here to make, at the closing session of this meeting, 3 concrete commitments of actions their governments will take to translate the lofty ideals of the Helsinki Accords into reality in people's lives. This is a year when many of the founding principles of this important body have been violated. This presents a challenge to the OSCE, and it's one that the world is counting on you to meet. I hope you will not flinch from a clear-eyed and honest review of whether and how states are upholding their commitments to protect and advance human rights. The rights and lives of many people depend on it, as does the peace and security of the region. I thank you again for the opportunity and the honor of being here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Massimino, for your very, very thoughtful statements. And I'm sure, of course, that this will, not only today, of course, in this session now dedicated to the statements of the participating states, but also later on, of course, in the working sessions will be reflected with a lot of statements also by the participating representatives of civil society. Thanks again for addressing us, and that brings me, of course, to the last part of our opening session. We have more or less a little bit more than an hour now for statements by participating states before we finish at 1 p.m. for the lunch break. We have, in the order of the incoming notifications, now already a number of statements already which will now follow. You will see later on that is already in preparation of the working sessions, a little clock, you know it basically from the Permanent Council, very familiar to most of you. So we would be pleased, of course, if you could stick to 4, maximum 5 minutes, better, of course, 4. And in the beginning, of course, I just tell you what we have now as the order of those countries in the order they were contacting us who want to take the floor. First of all, it's Italy on the behalf of the European Union, then the United States of America, Turkey, the Russian Federation, Norway, Canada, Serbia, Ukraine, Armenia, Tajikistan. That is the delegations we have for now. The rest, of course, speaking list is still open, and we begin, as announced, with Italy on behalf of the European Union. The floor is yours to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Thank you, Chair. I pass the floor to the Director for Human Rights and Democracy of the European Union, Silvio Gonzato.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to speak on behalf of the European Union at the opening session of the OSCE Human Dimension Implementation Meeting. Chair, allow me to point out that this statement is being made also on behalf of Liechtenstein and Montenegro, and that the list of aligned states is not final, and it will be provided on the written version of this statement. First of all, the EU would like to express its thanks and appreciation to the Swiss chairmanship in office for its able leadership of the OSCE this year. Our gratitude for the excellent preparation of this meeting, despite the particular difficult context in which the agenda was adopted, goes also to the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights and its newly appointed director, Dr. Michael Georg Link, to whom we wish a lot of success in his new position. We look forward to working closely with you, Dr. Link, and wish to pay tribute to the work of your predecessor, Ambassador Lenarčič, who served ODIHR with distinction. Chairman, this year's OSCE meetings are overshadowed by the crisis in and around Ukraine. The European Union remains very much concerned about the crisis and its impact on the human rights situation in Ukraine, including Crimea, as evidenced by the UN, as well as by ODIHR and the High Commissioner of National Minorities in their Human Rights Assessment Mission report. We remain particularly concerned about the reported targeting and killing of civilians, abductions, torture, ill treatment, and other serious human rights abuses and violations of international law. We note from these reports that the human rights violations did not precede, but rather accompanied and followed the emergence of various armed pro-Russian separatist groups in eastern Ukraine and Crimea. We also note that it is the activities of these groups that are the root cause of the serious human suffering experienced by the civilian population. The EU continues to strongly condemn the illegal annexation of Crimea and reiterates the urgent need for a sustainable political solution based on respect for Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, unity, and independence. To this end, the EU is closely cooperating with several stakeholders, including the OSCE. The EU has condemned the aggression by Russian armed forces on Ukrainian soil and called upon the Russian Federation to immediately withdraw all its military assets and forces from Ukraine. The EU welcomes the signing of the Minsk Protocol on the 5th of September and the memorandum of the 19th of September, and believes that effective and comprehensive monitoring of the Russia-Ukrainian border should be an integral part of the solution. Let me say that the OSCE has provided an exemplary response to this crisis, including through the Human Rights Assessment Mission of the ODIHR and of the High Commissioner on National Minorities, mission that, amongst others, covered an important aspect of human rights violations in Crimea, through the representative on freedom of the media and her continuous observation of and reporting on violation of media freedom and safety of journalists, and through the rapid deployment of the Special Monitoring Mission. The EU, together with its member states, strongly supports, also financially, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission and its independence, since we consider that independent monitoring is essential for diffusing tensions and fostering peace, stability, and security. We deeply regret the continuous obstacles impeding the activities of the OSCE and urge all parties to fully cooperate and support the OSCE missions. The OSCE work to enhance the respect of fundamental rights and freedoms, and the OSCE work to enhance the respect of fundamental rights and freedoms and towards a functional democracy in Ukraine has been outstanding, also through the continuous engagement of the OSCE representative on freedom of the media and through the work done by the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities. The EU and its member states have supported the OSCE election observation mission to the Ukrainian presidential elections, including by financing and deploying OSCE observers, and will extend the same support for the forthcoming parliamentary elections. We believe that, when and where appropriate, the OSCE can also play a valuable role in supporting the local dialogue processes. Looking beyond this, the EU is particularly grateful for the work done by ODIHR in relation to election observation, which is based on a sound methodology and strong commitment to promote democracy. The EU deploys election observation missions outside the OSCE area on the basis of a methodology very similar to the one employed by ODIHR, and we regularly share experiences and ideas with ODIHR on how to improve independent and competent election observation in the framework of the Declaration of Principles for International Election Observation of 2005. Chairman, the OSCE, with its three-pillar approach, sees human rights as an essential factor in the promotion of peace and prosperity. Similarly, the EU is convinced that there cannot be lasting security and stability without respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and has placed human rights at the heart of its foreign policy. The adoption in June 2012 of our EU strategic framework and an action plan on human rights and democracy bears witness to this. Both our organizations recognize the link between security and human rights, and this is why the OSCE is for us a key partner in the promotion and protection of human rights. The OSCE institutions, structures, and field operations continue to provide valuable support, assistance, and expertise to promote human rights and fundamental freedoms. The EU is committed to implementing in full all OSCE human dimension commitments. These commitments do not concern exclusively the internal affairs of a state, but are matters of direct and legitimate concern to all participating states. This is why we call on all participating states to abide by their commitments, to closely cooperate with the OSCE, and make full use of the assistance offered. This meeting is the main instrument we have to monitor effectively compliance with the OSCE human dimension commitments, including through the identification of gaps, the exchange of best practices and recommendations, as well as their proper and systematic follow-up. This is extremely important, and we should look at ways of making our work here even more focused and operational in order to increase its impact on our policies. Allow me to outline now what are currently our main priorities. In the OSCE human dimension context, the EU concentrates on fundamental freedoms, such as freedom of expression, assembly, and association, freedom of religion or belief, and freedom of both online and offline media, while defending and promoting the universality, interdependence, and indivisibility of all human rights. The prevention of torture, abolition of death penalty, fight against all forms of discrimination, including against LGBTI persons, protection of human rights defenders, and engagement with civil society, including youth, are also important areas. Additionally, the EU promotes gender equality, women's political and economic empowerment, and elimination of gender-based violence and sexual violence in conflict across the OSCE area. Last year, we voiced our concern at the way in which fundamental rights and freedoms were being increasingly challenged in some part of the OSCE area. Unfortunately, this trend has persisted and indeed worsened, as confirmed by several international bodies and organizations, including the UN and the Council of Europe, with growing pressure on civil society, threats to journalists, bloggers, and human rights activists, restrictions on freedom of expression, and undue political interference with the justice system. Against this background, the EU welcomes ODIHR's engagement in the preparation of the OSCE guidelines on the protection of human rights defenders, taking into account the serious situation of human rights defenders in the OSCE space. 10 years ago, we adopted the EU guidelines on human rights defenders, manifesting our conviction that if we truly want to promote a stable and peaceful world, we cannot afford to see the voice of civil society silenced. A vigorous and independent civil society is in fact essential in order to ensure protection and promotion of human rights and to enhance the accountability of our governments. We therefore welcome and encourage the participation of civil society organizations from across the whole OSCE area in this and in other OSCE meetings, and appreciate the views and recommendations they provide on specific country situations and thematic issues. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to constructive discussions during the next 2 weeks and would like to use this opportunity to refer to two side events the EU is organizing, one on freedom of expression and one on freedom of peaceful assembly. Both freedoms are part of our priorities, as witnessed by the fact that we adopted in May this year the EU guidelines on freedom of expression online and offline. During these two events, we intend to discuss recent trends regarding the enjoyment of these freedoms in the OSCE space and identify ways of increasing our engagement with the active support of the OSCE and its bodies. I would like to add that the EU will also co-sponsor side events on enforced disappearances and violence and hate crimes against LGBTI persons. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, looking at our agenda and the other planned side events, I'm convinced that the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting of 2014 will demonstrate once again the significance of the human dimension as an essential foundation for the OSCE comprehensive engagement for security. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of the European Union speaking on behalf of the 28 delegations of the member states of the EU and of other delegations here. Now I do pass the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States of America.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and we have a formal statement that will be distributed. But first, I'd like to say that I very much appreciated the interventions by the panel in the front. In particular, Mr. Chairman, your recitation of relevant history is extraordinarily important now as we approach a very difficult time in the international system. Institutions and international law being challenged as never before. So it's important to understand how we've built the institutions and that legal basis for this organization, for the United Nations, for many other organizations in the international system. I also want to say, with respect to Mrs. Massimino's statement, I think she has really set the context for this meeting. And with respect to the comments she's made about my own country, I can say that what she says about terrorism and the fear it creates is absolutely correct. It does create irrational reactions and policies, even laws. But we do have a legal and political system in my country that enables us to correct these issues. If I could paraphrase Winston Churchill, he said, eventually we do the right thing after trying everything else first. But it is true we've made a great deal of progress on a number of issues in the United States, in particular with respect to LGBT issues both at the federal level and at the state level. So as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the civil rights law, as we look at continuing problems with respect to race, I do think we're on the right path, and I think that every country around this table has to recognize that respect for human rights, the creation of democratic institutions, is really a journey as opposed to a destination. And the real question is whether we are on the right path. No one is perfect. Let me just say that with respect to the OSCE, this is a crucial meeting. This institution is being challenged as never before. Its comprehensive security concept recognizes that security and cooperation among states is indivisible from respect for human rights and democratic principles within states. That's extraordinarily important right now to emphasize. And when governments breach these fundamental principles, they do harm not just to their neighbors, but also to their own citizens' ability to fully take part and succeed in an increasingly interconnected and rules-based system. I'd like first now to address with great sadness the Russian Federation's actions in Ukraine and also internally. As the head of USAID, the Agency for International Development, I worked very, very closely with Russian counterparts in the early 1990s. They became friends. I understood what their hopes and aspirations were for democracy, for creating a more market-based economy. And it saddens me to see what has happened in that country. The steps that have been taken in Ukraine, I've heard all of the arguments about this being in the vital interest, that this Ukraine being a part of the hegemony of Russia. But the fact of the matter is that the actions that Russia has taken are not in the interest of the citizens of Russia. As Russia becomes increasingly isolated from the international community, both politically and economically, citizens are going to protest, as they did yesterday, in the thousands. So it is to hear an argument that national pride, maybe even paranoia about the enlargement of NATO or whatever, is an excuse for violating international commitments is simply specious. It's contrary to the interest of Russia. Its illegal occupation and attempted annexation of Crimea is something we around this table do not recognize. Its armed support of violent separatists, the direct insertion of Russian forces and heavy weapons into Ukraine despite denials, and the dramatically deteriorating human rights conditions in separatist-controlled areas are really very, very disappointing and contribute to the isolation of Russia. I might say that with respect to Ukraine, I was there in May for the elections. There should be no question, and thanks to ODIHR and to OSCE, there were thousands of observers there. That election certainly created a legitimate presidency. Ukraine still has many challenges. There has been a great deal of corruption in that society, and there will be parliamentary elections coming next. We very much appreciate the Swiss chairmanship's commitment to strengthening the special monitoring mission in Ukraine, and we need to do all that we can, and it is a shame that Ukraine has to be distracted by what is happening on its eastern border. We obviously have great aspirations and hopes for the Minsk agreement, and it is encouraging to hear from the table here that the monitoring of this ceasefire has commenced, although there continue to be very serious problems. So I say with great sadness that the Russian government has enacted a series of new laws that restrict fundamental freedoms. These laws, in some ways, as has been indicated, have been emulated by countries in the region. They will be self-defeating. And I can only say that while my country has made mistakes, it's very, very important to have mechanisms for self-correcting. And as you basically clamp down on the freedom of expression, the freedom of assembly, you're going to be losing the opportunity for self-corrective actions. During the next 2 weeks of this HDIM, my delegation also will draw attention to serious human dimension concerns arising in other parts of the OSCE region. To cite a few illustrative examples, the intensified closing of space for independent civil society in Hungary, as has been mentioned earlier, in Azerbaijan, and for the free and open expression in Turkey, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, continue to imprison human rights defenders, journalists, and peaceful religious adherents amidst abiding concerns from the outside world about torture and unfair trials. Political prisoners remain behind bars in Belarus, and we call for the immediate and unconditional release of all individuals imprisoned in participating states for nothing more than peacefully exercising their human rights. An alarming spike in anti-Semitic hate crimes and hate speech gives Jewish communities a well-founded reason to fear for their safety. In many European Union states, public officials still make statements and take actions that condone and even tacitly promote intolerance against the Roma. We share the concerns of principal governments and citizens across Europe about the growing appeal of blatantly extremist and xenophobic parties in local and national and EU-wide elections. We regret the denial of a seat at this table for Kosovo and hope that the discussions between Serbia and Kosovo will allow Kosovo soon to participate. Mr. Chairman, Excuse me. The participating states are fortunate to have at our disposal an array of diplomatic instruments and institutions, some of which have spoken this morning, to meet the human dimension commitments and to avert and respond to crisis. We urge all states to take great advantage of these institutions within the OSCE. I was privileged to meet with the OSCE representatives in Ukraine in May, and they're doing a wonderful job in very difficult circumstances. So in conclusion, this is an important time for this organization, for all international organizations. And I hope that by the time this meeting is over, we will have recommitted ourselves to the principles that made this organization such an important contributor to peace and security in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. The next delegation to speak is the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I would like to express our thanks and appreciation to ODIHR for organizing the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting, together with expression of our gratitude to our hosts, the Polish authorities, for their traditional generous hospitality. The substantial body of human dimension commitments produced by the OSCE over the past decades forms an integral part of our organization's comprehensive security concept. It goes without saying that the ultimate success of the OSCE can be measured to a great extent by the effective implementation of these commitments across the entire OSCE region. The HDIM, in giving us a yearly opportunity to assess the implementation of our shared commitments, fully reflects the key role of human rights for our common security and stability. There is no doubt that the HDIM's value also stems to a large part from the indispensable participation of civil society, giving all participants the opportunity to voice their concerns and make recommendations. This year, against the backdrop of the crisis in and around Ukraine, where various human rights assessment missions, as well as our OSCE institutions, have ascertained numerous and grave human rights violations in the eastern parts of the country, as well as in Crimea over the preceding months. It is even more important to soberly review the implementation of our human dimension commitments. Mr. Chairperson, Turkey fully supports the Swiss chairmanship's focus on the implementation of existing commitments in the human dimension. It is our hope and expectation that the relative positive trend in the human dimension, which emerged last year through the valuable efforts of the Ukrainian chairmanship, will continue under the consecutive Swiss and Serbian chairmanships, notwithstanding the challenges posed by the crisis in and around Ukraine. While upholding the commitments in such critical areas as fundamental freedoms, human rights, and democratization and rule of law, of particular importance to Turkey in this regard is addressing the alarming rise of racism, xenophobia, intolerance, and discrimination in the OSCE region. It is an indisputable fact that global economic and financial difficulties, coupled with the increase in unemployment in many participating states, are exacerbating the already grave situation on the ground and having negative repercussions on the perception of migrants. Those considered to be different or other, whether on the basis of their ethnic background, their religious beliefs, or other reasons, are frequently subjected to incidents of discrimination and xenophobia, which often entail harassment and violence, violating the human rights and fundamental freedoms of the victims. In this regard, I very much welcome the observations and recommendations that have been shared by our keynote speaker, Ms. Elisa Massimino. Furthermore, we appreciate the Swiss chairmanship's timely decision to devote this year's third supplementary human dimension meeting, which will be held at the end of October, to the issue of human rights and fundamental freedoms in economic crisis. In this context, I also wish to underline Islamophobia, which leads to an additional dimension of discrimination against migrant communities. The situation of members of other faiths or Roma and Sinti is alarming as well. We must all do more to strengthen the implementation of our commitments in the field of tolerance and discrimination if we are to have a realistic chance of eradicating the rising threat without approaching human dimension selectively or by setting up artificial hierarchies. Let me also emphasize at this point our commitment to the goals of improving the rights of women, ensuring their full and equal participation in all spheres of life, and strengthening their status in society. This is why we also take the issue of violence against women very seriously and are doing all we can to eradicate it. In conclusion, allow me to reiterate our hope that the discussions of the next 2 weeks will provide us not only with the opportunity to critically scrutinize the implementation of our existing human dimension commitments, but also with fresh insights on how to address worrying trends and alarming recent developments, along with valuable recommendations, which will help us chart the path ahead. Looking forward to fruitful and constructive discussions in all the working sessions, as well as the various side events. I wish the participants of the HDIM every success. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Next delegation is the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Спасибо, уважаемый господин председатель, дамы и господа. Мы приветствуем всех участников сегодняшнего заседания и рассчитываем на конструктивный и уважительный диалог по широкому кругу вопросов, связанных с выполнением обязательств ОБСЕ. Признательны правительству Польши, швейцарскому председательству и БДИПЧ, его особенно новому руководителю, господину Линку, за подготовку мероприятия. Российская Федерация остается верной взятым на себя обязательствам ОБСЕ, неуклонно реализуя их на законодательном уровне и путем совершенствования правоприменительной практики. Уважение человеческого достоинства, защита основных прав и свобод человека, создание условий для всестороннего развития личности лежит в основе государственной политики России. В то же время далеко не всегда таким подходом руководствуются наши западные партнеры. Украинский кризис был спровоцирован вмешательством Соединенных Штатов и Евросоюза. Именно Соединенные Штаты привычным для себя образом грубо вмешались во внутренние дела Украины, нарушая Хельсинкские принципы и устав ООН. Это они поощряли февральский государственный переворот в Киеве и карательную операцию на востоке страны, в результате которой погибло 3000 человек и сотни тысяч покинули свои жилища. Свою ответственность за случившееся в Вашингтоне теперь пытаются свалить на других, в том числе на нас. Украинский кризис не только высветил, но и усилил системные проблемы в области европейской безопасности. Это относится и к гуманитарному измерению. Соединенные Штаты Америки претендуют на отслеживание ситуации с правами человека в других странах, о чем, правда, никто не просил их. При этом они не могут решить проблемы у себя дома. США, в отличие от других государств ОБСЕ, за последние годы не расширили свое участие в международных договорах и конвенциях. Избирательная практика в США весьма далека от совершенства. Так и не закрыта позорная тюрьма Гуантанамо, о чем уже говорилось здесь. Медицинские эксперименты над приговоренными к смертной казни навевают самые мрачные ассоциации. Дети остаются одной из самых незащищенных категорий в США. В этом образце демократии до сих пор используется детский труд, процветает торговля детьми, в том числе в целях сексуальной эксплуатации. Жесткое обращение с усыновленными детьми не расследуется должным образом. А события в Фергюсоне как нельзя лучше продемонстрировали остроту застарелых проблем расизма и сегрегации. К примеру, США, получающих другие государства на фоне серьезных вызовов и угроз в своей стране, к сожалению, следуют и некоторые другие западные партнеры по ОБСЕ. Евросоюз и Канада также упорно не желают замечать и отказываются признавать очевидное нарастание опасных тенденций противодействия, которым предусмотрено обязательствами ОБСЕ. В итоге было заблокировано включение в повестку дня совещания ряда важных вопросов: борьба с возрождением нацистской идеологии и распространением праворадикальных течений и взглядов, защита журналистов, находящихся в опасных профессиональных командировках, включая вооруженные конфликты. Считаем неприемлемой линию на жесткое давление и вмешательство во внутренние дела государств, проводимые США и Евросоюзом. Игнорирование основных прав и свобод человека, включая право народов на самоопределение, может привести к гибельным последствиям. Мы уже стали свидетелями подобной политики, которая вызвала многочисленные нарушения правозащитных норм и норм международного гуманитарного права, массовую гибель гражданского населения и, в конечном счете, гуманитарную катастрофу в отдельных регионах в зоне ответственности ОБСЕ. Вызывают серьезную обеспокоенность попытки подорвать принцип равного отношения к обязательствам ОБСЕ, наделение особыми правами и свободами избранной категории граждан, создание специального режима защиты правозащитников, блогеров и секс-меньшинств. Неправильно абсолютизировать отдельные свободы за счет забвения других. Тревогу вызывает тенденция механического насаждения моделей построения демократии без учета всего накопленного опыта развития различных цивилизаций и культур. Мы видим определенную опасность для общества в попытках подменить традиционные ценности: честь, достоинство, справедливость, свободу, ответственность, человеческую жизнь, семью некими неолиберальными ориентирами. Хотел бы подчеркнуть, что мы не против того, чтобы государства или группы стран исповедовали у себя те ценности, которые принимаются их обществами. Однако мы категорически против того, чтобы их ценности, многие из которых, кстати, не отражены в имеющихся международных обязательствах, выдавались бы за универсальные и чуть ли не силой навязывались другим странам без учета их истории, географии, религии и культуры. Такая ценностная интервенция – не что иное, как нарушение прав человека на свободный выбор. Особого внимания заслуживает проблематика защиты прав нацменьшинств, в том числе вопиющий для современной Европы феномен безгражданства в ряде стран Евросоюза. Дискриминация национальных меньшинств, рост агрессивного национализма, поддержанный на государственном уровне, противоречит многочисленным обязательствам ОБСЕ, приводит к расколу общества на людей первого и второго сорта. Большую тревогу вызывает усиление опасных тенденций переписывания истории, героизации нацистов и их пособников. Последствия такой политической близорукости могут быть трагическими. Они не только могут привести к расколу общества, но и, как показывает пример одной из стран, способны провоцировать гражданские войны. Ожидаем, что бдительный Верховный комиссар по делам нацменьшинств займут более активную позицию в этих весьма чувствительных вопросах. Другим общим для всех вызовом является ослабление во многих странах ОБСЕ иммунитета к радикальным идеологиям и взглядам, причем зачастую под лозунгом уважения права на свободу выражения мнения. Важно, наконец, навести порядок в области наблюдения за выборами. Единых правил работы нет, а созданная БДИПЧ методика и та применяется иногда непоследовательно. Смысл международных наблюдений заключается в равном применении общих стандартов для всех государств ОБСЕ, невзирая на их исторический и демократический опыт. Мы намерены продолжать серьезные дискуссии по этой теме с выходом на конкретные решения, которые поменяли сегодняшнее неудовлетворительное положение вещей. Дальнейшего развития требует дискуссии по облегчению свободы передвижения и либерализации визовых режимов. Господин председатель, несмотря на нынешние непростые времена и сохраняющийся кризис доверия в отношениях, Россия твердо исходит из необходимости продолжения усилий по созданию единого гуманитарного пространства как неотъемлемой части общего пространства равной и неделимой безопасности от Ванкувера до Владивостока. Имеющееся расхождение в трактовке отдельных обязательств ОБСЕ, их приоритетности, споры между различными ценностными моделями не должны становиться непреодолимым препятствием для совместных усилий по развитию конструктивных отношений между государствами и народами, формированию единого сообщества безопасности. Важно продолжать совместный поиск объединительных проектов и актуальных тем, которые бы не разъединяли, а консолидировали это сообщество. Россия к этой работе готова. В заключение хотел бы пожелать успехов в работе совещания. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Before I pass the floor to the next delegation, which will be the distinguished representative of Norway, I would like to mention that we have now got some new delegations wanting to take the floor. We would now close the list, so in order to give everybody the possibility also to speak, and then we have, in the end, very shortly also, as you know, the right to reply if requested, and of course, if really necessary. With these words, let us come to the distinguished representative of Norway. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I join others in thanking you and your institution for the excellent preparations for this meeting, despite the regrettable difficulties caused by the unprecedented late adoption of the agenda this year. Mr. Chairman, let me state up front, HDIM is important, both as a platform to receive feedback from civil society and as a place to exchange best practices and discuss difficulties faced in implementing our human dimension commitments. Previous speakers have stressed the link between respect for human rights and stable, secure, and peaceful societies. Civil society helps us as governments to identify the gaps and challenges in the implementation of our commitments, and they help us improve our policies to the benefit of all. Human rights defenders and independent media are an asset. A lively civil society is a sign of a true democracy. The pressure on civil society in several participating states is therefore of great concern to us. Human rights defenders are attacked, imprisoned, or silenced. The abuse of the justice system to stop criticism is particularly worrying. Attacks on journalists are intended to stop information from independent sources and prevent citizens from being informed and expressing their opinions. These attacks must be investigated and prosecuted. Chairman, we greatly appreciate ODIHR's work on elaborating the guidelines on human rights defenders. Regrettably, the present situation clearly shows the need for these guidelines. We hope they will be widely used. Mr. Chairman, if I said widely, I meant widely used, I'm sorry. The importance, Mr. Chairman, of respecting commitments is clearly shown by the situation in Ukraine, and I would like to say I do not at all buy the Russian accusation that the crisis in Ukraine is caused by US and EU interference in Ukraine. On the contrary, the Russian Federation's failure to respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine has led to the present crisis. Chairman, we commend the quick response of all three OSCE institutions. The OSCE is now in a key position in resolving this crisis. The Special Monitoring Mission is a valuable tool, and all parties must ensure that the SMM can do its work safely and effectively. And human rights and international law must be respected by all parties in the conflict. But we should not let the crisis in Ukraine overshadow our meeting. I am convinced the representatives of civil society will remind us that there are challenges to be addressed in all our countries. Mr. Chairman, the situation in many participating states shows the need to strengthen and update our commitments in line with international obligations. This important work must be kept up. Citizens' right to dignity and fulfillment of human rights must always have a priority. We welcome the proposals by the Swiss chairmanship to agree on Ministerial Council decisions on prevention of torture and an addendum to the Gender Action Plan. We also believe a declaration on civil society would be very useful. Mr. Chairman, allow me now to mention a few side events we are supporting. On Wednesday, Norway, the Netherlands, and France invite you to a working breakfast on enforced disappearances in the OSCE region. Tomorrow at lunchtime, we are co-organizing a meeting on the impact of mass surveillance on journalists, lawyers, and other professionals. We are also co-sponsoring with Latvia an event on minority education and bilingual education. And in addition, we are co-sponsors for an event on hate crime against LGBTI persons, one on civil society in Hungary, and one on manipulation of state-owned media. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, let me stress that we consider these human dimension implementation meetings crucial for the overall aim of better implementing our common commitments. We are ready to discuss further improvement of the meetings as proposed by the Swiss chairman. Mr. Chairman, I will circulate the full version of my statement in writing, and now thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, also, of course, for having saved us the necessary minutes in order to let everybody speak here, hoping, of course, this will serve also as an example. Et maintenant, j'ai l'honneur de passer la parole à la représentante du Canada, Madame l'ambassadeur.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Thank you to you and to colleagues surrounding you for your introductory remarks. Thank you also to Mrs. Massimino for challenging us and for providing us with much food for thought, reflection, and action this morning. Mr. Chairperson, in order for real progress to be achieved in the human dimension of the OSCE, the integrity and commitment of all participating states is required. Indeed, it is only when we prioritize, and I say prioritize, the implementation of these commitments that we will achieve real progress towards comprehensive, cooperative, equal and indivisible security, including through the full respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It has been painful to watch the very principles on which this organization is funded be dismissed and ignored month after month by the actions of the Russian Federation in Ukraine, including, of course, in Crimea. These actions are flagrant disregard of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The results of Russia's violent actions have been deadly for the people of Ukraine and also for others, not least the victims of the flight MH17 tragedy. Canada has and will continue to deplore the death of so many caught in this senseless and brutal aggression. We call on Russia to cease its aggression against Ukraine and to adopt a cooperative approach in which peace and security, democracy, human rights are not mere words to be repeated by a state-controlled press, but real values and principles upon which we can build true security for all in the OSCE region. Mr. Chairperson, allow me to highlight Canada's priorities in the human dimension briefly. We particularly welcome the opportunity to address the issue of violence against women and girls during the special day dedicated to this issue. As we seek to combat intolerance and hate crime, we are extremely concerned by the actions of some participating states in failing to address, or worse, implicitly encouraging violence against targeted groups, including LGBT persons. Violence and discrimination on the basis of one's belief or religion is equally unacceptable. Canada is pleased to support ODIHR's efforts on this issue. The fight against discrimination and violence, however, must not be used as a cynical tool to stifle freedom of expression. Transparency and accountability are best served when citizens are free to express their views. It is the responsibility of all democracies to reflect the will of their people. And in order to know the will of their people, the voices of citizens must be heard. New technologies are now providing innovative means for dialogue between governments and their citizens. These must be used, and of course, human rights must be protected both online and offline. Human rights and fundamental freedoms are concepts that need to be protected and maintained by democratic institutions and the rule of law. Canada salutes efforts made by the OSCE and ODIHR in that regard, including through the deployment of election observation missions. We are also proud to co-sponsor a side event this Thursday on best practices to support Ukraine's democratic institutions, and we hope that many of you will join us. Before concluding, Canada would like to officially welcome you, Director Ling, as the new ODIHR Director. Your appointment comes at a particularly challenging time in the organization's history. As some try to reinterpret, or worse, backtrack on our mutual commitments through the insidious promotion of so-called traditional values, We are confident that you and your team will continue to defend and advance our human dimension commitments based on universal rights and human dignity for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The floor is next to the distinguished representative of Serbia and the incoming chairmanship. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. We would like to thank ODIHR and the Swiss chairmanship for organizing this year's Human Dimension implementation meeting, as well as to our Polish hosts for their hospitality. We believe that Human Dimension implementation meeting is a great opportunity for having an open and frank dialogue to discuss the key topics and challenges we are facing in the area of implementation of the Human Dimension commitments, which definitely have an impact on the security in the OSCE area. In the Astana commemorative declaration, the participating states recalled a common vision that comprehensive and lasting security is not possible without respect for human rights and democratic standards. Therefore, the commitments relating to the human dimension have to be safeguarded, strengthened, and greater efforts need to be undertaken to promote them. During this year, our organization has been faced with one of the biggest crises in its history. We support the activities of all OSCE institutions and structures in that regard. It is necessary to invest all possible efforts to find a peaceful solution and to rebuild trust and confidence within the entire OSCE region. Recognizing that the inherent dignity of the individual is at the core of the OSCE comprehensive security, in the joint working plan of Swiss and Serbian chairmanships, we agreed on further updating and strengthening the implementation of all OSCE human dimension commitments. In order to improve the work of the organization, we should implement our commitments within this dimension. In that regard, we call upon all participating states to work towards that goal. We believe that additional efforts should be invested as well in implementation of the human dimension commitments in many areas, such as the rule of law, freedom of expression, and freedom of the media, including protection of journalists, freedom of assembly and association, protection of rights of persons belonging to national minorities, tolerance and non-discrimination, to name a few that will be highly on the priority list of Serbian chairmanship next year. We also see the value in strengthening national institutions for protection of human rights, thus ensuring progress towards better implementation of our commitments. We are looking forward to welcome you on our side event on the 30th September in the evening, when we will unveil our priorities for the next year. Mr. Chairperson, the role of the civil society is very high on the list of priorities during our 2 consecutive chairmanships. We consider that strengthening the links with civil society and promotion of its active involvement would contribute to further implementation of the OSCE commitments in this dimension. We believe that cross-dimensionality is a key strength and comparative advantage of our organization. In that context, we believe that we have to pay much more attention to our youth, their needs and strivings. During next year, we will propose to work on an action plan on youth and security from cross-dimensional perspective, thus putting the youth highly on the OSCE agenda, including other human dimension events. As incoming chairmanship, we will continue to work on human dimension events review. In the previous period of the OSCE, participating states have expressed their interest in improving modalities of the human dimension events with a view to making them more effective and focused. Let's hope that we might see each other next year here earlier than is now envisaged. In that context, we would like to encourage all participating states to have a constructive debate on the very important issues in order to achieve concrete results. In addition, timely adoption of necessary decisions in this dimension will immensely contribute to improving of our work and effectiveness of the organization as well. Next year, it will be 40 years from adopting the Helsinki Final Act. During the past, we have been facing many challenges, but we managed to respond in an appropriate manner. Therefore, today's crisis creates for us both challenge and opportunity to jointly enhance our cooperation and security. Recognizing the importance of Helsinki Plus 40 process, we believe that this is an opportunity to reconfirm our commitments and to build upon the OSCE achievement across the 3 dimensions. Before closing, Mr. Chairperson, allow me to take this opportunity to underline the role of the OSCE institutions in assisting participating states in implementing their commitments. We would like to emphasize in particular synergy between ODIHR, Representative of Freedom of Media, and High Commissioner for National Minorities. Their role is indispensable, and therefore we must create the necessary conditions for them to carry out their mandates. In these challenging times, only strong, independent, and professional institutions with sound financial and human resources can help us properly address these issues. Taking into account divergent views on the work of some OSCE institutions, we have to work jointly towards overcoming divisions and mistrust. Finally, we would like to call upon all participants at this meeting to contribute to constructive dialogue and provide concrete recommendations. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now have three delegations who want to take the floor. Before we come to right to reply, where I have two delegations, first Ukraine, then Armenia, then Tajikistan, and the floor is to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates. A delegation of Ukraine would like to join previous speakers in expressing gratitude to Swiss chairmanship and ODIHR, and also the Polish government for organizing this meeting. Regretfully, this year's Human Dimension implementation meeting takes place against the backdrop of serious challenges to human dignity and security in the OSCE area posed by Russian aggression against Ukraine. The very foundation of the OSCE, namely the Helsinki Final Act, has been challenged. Basically, we have witnessed one state to undertake a comprehensive attack on the OSCE acquis in all three dimensions. Since this aggression started, over 900 Ukrainian military have been killed and about 3,400 were wounded. Only after the ceasefire was announced, 36 military lost their lives. 100 remained in captivity and dozens are missing. Security and living conditions of millions of people are shattered. The number of internally displaced persons amounts to 270,000. Infrastructure of large and powerful industrial regions is devastated. Russian military aggression against Ukraine has entailed numerous human rights violations committed by occupation authorities in the Crimea and by illegal armed groups in the east of Ukraine. And here I would like to express high appreciation that from the very beginning of the aggression, the OSCE and its autonomous institutions have been active in ensuring independent monitoring of the developments in Ukraine and facilitating solutions to emerging problems. In particular, we highly value the contribution of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, which was set up upon a request of the Ukrainian government. We also lay special hopes upon this mission with regard to ongoing efforts to ensure the implementation of the President Poroshenko peace plan in three major aspects. First, to monitor the ceasefire. Second, to monitor and seal the Ukrainian-Russian borders to halt flows of Russian armed forces, mercenaries, and military equipment into Ukraine. And third, to bring hostages back home. Independent findings of the Human Rights Assessment Mission undertaken by ODIHR and High Commissioner on National Minorities, as well as reports of the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, have clearly demonstrated that numerous violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms have not proceeded, but are a result of Russia's aggression and subversion against Ukraine. In Crimea, Russian occupant authorities clearly pursue a campaign of intimidation and expulsion against those who disagree with Russia's annexation of the peninsula and oppose Russian policies. Local residents are obliged to change their citizenship to avoid complication in their lives, which is a clear breach of OSCE commitment in human dimension. Crimean Tatars leaders were banned from entering Crimea. Only a few days ago, new Saudi authorities committed an unlawful and ungrounded assault on the National Assembly of Crimean Tatars, on the Majlis. As a result of this campaign, thousands have been forced out of their motherland. In the eastern regions of Ukraine, terrorists supported by Russia have reduced the human rights situation to an imminent humanitarian catastrophe. Terrorists daily endanger lives of the local residents by shelling residential areas. At the same time, they often prevent population of these regions from leaving the place. And under these conditions, Russian state-controlled media wage a full-scale information war against Ukraine, its sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as against unity and solidarity of all Europe. Yet, this war also targets Russian media and human rights activists as they try to disseminate truth about participation of the Russian armed force in the aggression against Ukraine and numerous casualties of this military campaign. They get beaten, threatened, and persecuted on false accusations. The September 17th assault on BBC crew, which came to Astrakhan to report a story on death of Russian military in Ukraine, speaks for itself. We reiterate our strong protest against ongoing violations of rights of the Ukrainian citizens illegally brought to and detained in Russia in contravention of international legal norms and principles. Their names stand for a synonym of contemporary political prisoners in Russia. I talk about Nadia Savchenko, Oleg Sentsov, and many others. Their detention is a part of the intimidation campaign against opponents of Russia's policies. Russia's flagrant breach of the OSCE founding principles, which have been a basis for dialogue and cooperation for decades, imperils European and international peace and security and inflicts serious damage to OSCE and its comprehensive security concept. This is not tolerable for these organizations. In terms of security, in terms of cooperation, this is not tolerable in Europe of 21st century. And this definitely requires a resolute response of the entire international community. Dear participants, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has seriously affected human dignity and security in the OSCE area. We believe that the organization should respond more decisively and effectively to these challenges. Only willingness of every single participating state to fully and in good faith abide by OSCE principles and commitments, as well as readiness to take meaningful and reliable steps to this end, can bring security back to the vast space from Vancouver to Vladivostok. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of Ukraine. Next to speak is the distinguished representative of Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I would like to start by expressing my deep gratitude and appreciation to the hosts of the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting, namely the Government of Poland and ODIHR. Furthermore, our thanks go to the Swiss Chairmanship for its tireless efforts to bring together all participating states to finally reach a common agenda that should be thoroughly addressed throughout our deliberations. My delegation particularly values the opportunity of mutual monitoring on the issues related to tolerance and non-discrimination, freedom of religion, freedom of expression and protection of journalists, freedom of movement, combating torture and other degrading treatment in the OSCE area. We are glad to note that some outcomes of our discussions will also be addressed in the framework of the Basel Ministerial Council. Mr. Chairman, in our view, these themes are an intrinsic part of comprehensive security. In paying particular attention to these fundamental freedoms, we are sending a strong message of embedding the protection of human rights into the overall European security. While acknowledging the role of international and regional cooperation in promoting human rights, we should remember that this link is reflective. The emergence of a strong human rights culture will bring more cooperation in sustaining and achieving peace and reconciliation along dividing lines, a common goal we have set up in Astana. Thus, genuine attempts towards ensuring greater respect for human rights and democratization are eventually destined to be translated into the political will of resolving conflicts, not only within, but beyond our own societies. The culture of peace and compromise should be first and foremost be shaped among decision makers themselves, back at home, in protecting human rights and implementing power sharing, then it can be reflected in conflict situations, including within protracted conflict environment. The alternative is bleak. The further deterioration of human rights that adversely affects the regional security and makes any peace-seeking efforts elusive, something that we clearly see in our region. Conflict should not be used as an excuse for maintaining and even worsening poor human rights records. Conflicts can and should be resolved on the basis of human rights. The existence of independent civil society is essential in promoting peace and reconciliation, while coercive measures aimed at silencing civil society deepens mistrust and gap between peoples. Unfortunately, we have witnessed new precedents of persecution of members of civil society and the anachronistic allegations of espionage activities in the OSCE area in the 21st century, to which we should have common and clear response. The OSCE is a cooperative platform where we can address not only OSCE commitments, but our other international obligations, including those related to use cogents. With this in mind, we welcome all participants of HDIM and look forward to the meaningful dialogue. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement, distinguished representative of Armenia. We now have, as the last of the announced statements, the distinguished representative of Tajikistan.
Уважаемый господин председатель, уважаемые дамы и господа, позвольте приветствовать вас на ежегодном совещании, посвященном рассмотрению выполнения обязательств государств-участников ОБСЕ по человеческому измерению и выразить слова благодарности организаторам мероприятия за создание прекрасных условий для нашей работы. Мы в Таджикистане рассматриваем площадку организованной ОБСЕ по человеческому измерению как хороший механизм контроля выполнения своих международных обязательств. Необходимо отметить, что ежегодно в сфере выполнения международных обязательств в области прав человека происходит заметное продвижение. За текущий год нами были разработаны и утверждены национальные планы действий по выполнению рекомендаций Комитета ООН по ликвидации всех форм дискриминации в отношении женщин по результатам рассмотрения 4 и 5 периодических докладов Республики Таджикистан по выполнению СИДО. По выполнению резолюции номер 1325 и 2122 Совета Безопасности ООН о роли женщин в процессе предотвращения и урегулирования конфликтов и миростроительства. По выполнению рекомендаций Комитета ООН по правам человека по результатам рассмотрения 2 периодического доклада о ходе выполнения Международного пакта о гражданских и политических правах. Был ратифицирован факультативный протокол к Конвенции ООН о ликвидации всех форм дискриминации в отношении женщин. У уполномоченного по правам человека создана рабочая группа по мониторингу мест лишения свободы из числа как государственных структур, так и НПО, входящих в коалицию против пыток. Основной целью данной группы является внедрение национального превентивного механизма и ратификация факультативного протокола к Конвенции против пыток. По результатам рассмотрения рекомендаций БДИП ОБСЕ по выборам, состоящейся из 25 пунктов, 18 выполнены полностью, в том числе путем внесения изменений в законодательство страны о выборах. Разработаны 9 инструкций для окружных избирательных комиссий, международных и местных наблюдателей, представителей средств массовой информации, политических партий и других. Что важно, эти документы и проделанная работа были предметом дискуссии между всеми партнерами, занимающимися проблемами прав человека. Подтверждением тому является подготовительное совещание по человеческому измерению, состоявшееся 18 и 19 июня этого года в Душанбе. Эта практика для нас является эффективным инструментом для продвижения прав человека. Хотелось бы выразить слова благодарности швейцарским коллегам за их вклад в наше общее дело в период их председательства в ОБСЕ. Между правительствами Таджикистана и Швейцарии ежегодно проходит диалог по правам человека, который служит обмену опыта и способствует эффективности деятельности в области прав человека. Уверены, что ежегодное совещание ОБСЕ по человеческому измерению даст хороший импульс для эффективного выполнения обязательств в рамках ОБСЕ. Желаем всем участникам плодотворной работы. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representation of Tajikistan. We now have, according to our rules of procedure, the right to reply. 2 delegations did mention that they would like to reply. I see a third one. We begin with the distinguished representative of Greece. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, I fully subscribe to the statement delivered by the European Union. In my national capacity, I would like to make a few comments. My country was mentioned by Mrs. Massimino in her speech with regard to the unfortunate rise of the extremist political party under the name Golden Dawn and its foothold in our national and European Parliament. This phenomenon is of great concern to the government and the Greek people. I will not go to the causes of it, some of which you have mentioned yourself, such as severe economic crisis, high unemployment, and immigration sentiments. I thank you for commending the arrest of the leadership of the Golden Dawn on the grounds of extremist and violent acts, even belatedly, as you said. I assure you that the forthcoming trial will take place in transparent and impartial terms. I have noted, however, that you mentioned that the Golden Dawn has a foothold in the judiciary and the police force. It is difficult for me to understand how anyone can substantiate the fact that the judiciary is in any way favorably inclined to any political party in Greece, let alone Golden Dawn, and therefore I cannot accept it. As far as the police is concerned, an internal investigation was conducted, the outcome of which did not show any significant relations between police officers and the Golden Dawn. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mrs. Massimino wants to make a very short clarification.
Yes, I don't know if it was the translation problem, but actually it was not the judiciary. I did not mention the judiciary, so I want to make that clear.
Okay, thanks for clarification. And thanks for having a short reply. I would ask the others, please, also to have a short reply. We have in total, and I would finish the list here, 3 more replies. First, Germany, then second, Belarus, and third, the United States of America. First of all, Ambassador Lüdeking, the floor is yours.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Und ich schließe mich zunächst in vollem Umfang der Erklärung an, die zuvor im Namen der Europäischen Union abgegeben worden ist. Ich möchte die Gelegenheit nutzen, um auf einige Punkte einzugehen, die hier während der Diskussion, den anschließenden Interventionen genannt worden sind. Zunächst einmal zu der Version, die mein russischer Kollege zu den Ereignissen in der Ukraine vorgetragen hat. Dazu will ich nicht Stellung nehmen. In der Zwischenzeit hat auch mein norwegischer Kollege dazu das Notwendige gesagt. Es sollte reichen, diese Version, wie sie von Russland vorgetragen worden ist, wird von meinem Land nicht geteilt. Ich möchte eigentlich zum Hauptthema und zu der Art und Weise Stellung nehmen, wie wir hier diese Veranstaltung bestreiten. Ich bin zunächst einmal Frau Massimino sehr dankbar dafür, dass sie den Rahmen für unsere Diskussion so präzise gesetzt hat. Und ich glaube, es ist ganz wichtig zu sagen, dass es keine Unterscheidung gibt, aus meiner Sicht, zwischen Teilnehmerstaaten der OSZE östlich oder westlich von Wien, wie wir üblicherweise sagen. Wir müssen uns alle den Defiziten stellen. Und ich bin auch sehr dankbar für den Ton, der von dem Leiter der US-Delegation, Professor Atwood, gesetzt worden ist. Es bedarf, glaube ich, der Demut einerseits, aber auch der Bereitschaft, den Defiziten, die wir alle haben, sich zu stellen. Gegenseitige Schuldzuweisungen, wie ich sie auch in dieser Debatte wieder gehört habe, reichen nicht aus. Ganz im Gegenteil, ich glaube, wir sollten versuchen, nicht uns gegenseitig etwas vorzuwerfen oder aufzurechnen, sondern versuchen, die Defizite gemeinsam zu beseitigen. Grundlage für diese Arbeit ist und bleibt das, was wir im Rahmen der KSZE und in der OSZE an Verpflichtungen gemeinsam vereinbart haben. Und diese sind sehr detailliert und sehr klar. Und ich will auch noch mal sagen, auch an die Adresse meiner russischen Kollegen, Menschenrechte sind universell und sie gelten für uns alle ohne Unterschied. Gleichzeitig, und das ist ein interessanter Aspekt, der ist aber auch in der Debatte nicht neu, was tun wir hier? Sollten wir uns nur auf das konzentrieren, was uns gemeinsam ist, wo wir gemeinsame Interessen haben? Oder sollten wir uns nicht auch auf das konzentrieren, was uns spaltet? Ich glaube ganz klar, was wir gemeinsam haben, was uns gemeinsam ist und was uns auch Einigkeit bescheren sollte, sind die gemeinsamen Verpflichtungen. Und was uns spaltet, ist genau das, was wir eigentlich heute auch in den Mittelpunkt stellen sollten, nämlich die Nichteinhaltung dieser Verpflichtungen und das gemeinsame Bemühungen, dieses effektiv anzugehen. Ich stimme meinem russischen Kollegen ausdrücklich zu, dass es für unsere Debatten keinerlei Tabus oder auch keinerlei Themen gibt, denen wir uns nicht zuwenden dürfen. Und die Themen, die er als solche benannt hat, die einem Tabu unterliegen sollen, sind genau auch die Themen, die aus meiner Sicht auch für mein Land sehr wichtig sind. Neonazismus, Rechtsradikalismus sind Sorgen und wir hatten in der letzten Woche im Ständigen Rat der OSZE dazu eine Debatte, in der ich auch Stellung bezogen habe. Und ich meine, dass dies Sorgen sind, die nicht einzelne Staaten haben, sondern die wir uns gemeinsam vornehmen müssen. Und ich möchte auch ausdrücklich betonen, es geht nicht nur um Rechtsradikalismus, es geht auch um Linksextremismus und natürlich das, was uns wahrscheinlich in der nächsten Zeit viel stärker noch beschäftigen wird, nämlich Islamismus. Und gerade da haben wir Themen, die wir nicht national abhandeln können. Diese Phänomene sind grenzüberschreitend und eigentlich kann man auch an solchen Themen schön exemplifizieren, was wir hier in der OSZE leisten müssen, nämlich dass wir diese Herausforderungen gemeinsam angehen sollten. Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Dankeschön, Botschafter Lüdeking. Danke für Ihre Stellungnahme. Next is in the retro replay, the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Прежде всего, хотел бы присоединиться к поздравлениям в адрес господина Михаила Георгалинко с его избранием на пост директора БДИЧ и его первым председательством на нынешнем Варшавском совещании, и пожелать ему успехов в его дальнейшей работе. Хотел бы отметить, что, несмотря на некоторые различия в подходах наших правительств по отдельным вопросам, в том числе упомянутым выступлению уважаемой американской делегации, мы полагаем, что сотрудничество и диалог являются наилучшими инструментами для продвижения обязательств, взятых на себя всеми государствами-участниками во всех трех измерениях ОБСЕ. Спасибо.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Belarus. I still have two replies. Of course, yes, I know legally, of course, the reply is open, but nevertheless, I would like to then, of course, also with respect to the rights of our translators and all of us to have a break, would like maybe that we can restrict it to these two. First of all, of course, Professor Edward and then the Russian Federation. That is the last I have here on my paper. Professor Edward, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm uncomfortable that the Russian Federation has the last word today, but that's all right. I welcome that. I want to address some of the points that the Russian delegate mentioned earlier and would simply point out that we have here today as our keynote speaker a person who's concerned about human rights and other issues in the United States, and she's expressed some legitimate issues, and they deserve very serious consideration. However, the Russian Federation delegate mentioned some issues that I have never heard about with respect. He must be watching Russian television, I think. They're cynical, they're specious distractions, it seems to me, but nonetheless, you can be sure that there's someone in the United States that will raise these issues and express concern about them. I just want to emphasize the United States is committed to universal rights that apply to everyone and that are the obligation of every government to protect. There is a reference to traditional values, and these have never been an excuse for denying human rights. I don't know what this reference means, but I know that the traditional values argument has been used to deny human rights in some countries, including the Russian Federation. I just want to emphasize that hate and discrimination against anyone, no matter their ethnic background, their religious beliefs, their sexual orientation. These are simply not traditional values. They're not in line with the OSCE commitments. And this meeting is basically, I want to emphasize, not about American values. It's about universal rights that each of our governments is responsible for protecting, and the promises and commitments that we've made to this organization, to ourselves, to the UN Charter, etc. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And then the floor is to the delegation of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо большое. Я постараюсь быть очень короток. Мы не можем принять ту критику, которую мы выслушали от многих делегаций. Я не хочу повторять те аргументы, которые мы много раз излагали на заседаниях Постоянного совета. Мы надеемся, что на этой неделе в Нью-Йорке дискуссия, которую организует швейцарское председательство на полях Генеральной Ассамблеи, поможет решить многие вопросы кризиса европейской безопасности и понять, что было причиной нынешнего кризиса. Я бы хотел задать несколько вопросов ряду делегаций, и мы бы хотели услышать ответы на эти вопросы в течение Варшавского совещания. Как, во-первых, продвигается расследование дела снайперов на Майдане? Мы очень давно о нем не слышали. Как проходит расследование событий в Одессе 2 мая, когда живьем было сожжено несколько десятков человек? Как проходит расследование событий в Мариуполе 9 мая, когда была расстреляна мирная демонстрация? Как проходит расследование убийств журналистов на Украине и притеснений их прав? Мы бы также хотели обсудить, как проходит расследование сбитого Боинга малазийских авиалиний. Мы давно о нем не слышали, оно замалчивается, и наше внимание пытаются отвлечь от этого расследования другими надуманными фактами. И мы хотели бы призвать ОБСЕ содействовать установлению фактов и справедливому расследованию всех этих нарушений прав человека. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. That was the last reply I had on my list. Before we go to the break, let me say that, of course, this discussion shows exactly that I think we have a lot of work to do. I thank you for all of your inputs, especially the panelists, but also, of course, the participating states. I look forward for very, very substantial and fascinating discussions we will have now with the participation of civil society in the next days. A special thanks to all the translators, having been very, very busy now, 3 hours together with us. Thanks to all of you there in your working places in the cabins. And especially now I would like to hand the floor for some technical announcement to Beatrice Balvin, the first Deputy Director of ODIHR, and thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, Michael. Dear participants, before we close this opening session, I would like to draw your attention to a few notes of technical information. Most of it is already in the documents that you should have received, the timetable and the meeting manual. As it has been already mentioned this morning, this year we have the whole meeting being live streamed at the 2014 HDIM website. As you have seen, taking the floor takes a little bit of discipline from all of us. The speakers list will be always open 1 hour ahead of each working session, but we encourage you all to submit your statements, your written statements for later on distribution, and try to focus on recommendations. Time will be kept into around 5 minutes unless the number of people wanting to take the floor is too large, so the moderators will be informing us of the time assigned at that particular occasion. Also, providing in advance your statements to the interpreters would facilitate translation. And ODIHR will continue to compile all recommendations emerging from the meeting and the different working sessions, so please provide your written statements to the documentation center. Each session, apart from the opening and closing, has a rapporteur assigned that will produce a summary of the session that will be circulated and later on consolidated for the final reports. There are also a large number of interesting side events that are scheduled in the course of the implementation meeting, and they are indicated already in your timetables. Delegates as well as NGOs and international organizations room is located on the first floor with a number of computers and other office equipment shall you need it. And the restaurant and cafe are available for participants during the whole meeting with special rates, so just show your cards. Please familiarize yourselves immediately after this plenary session with emergency exit procedures to be followed in case of fire or other accidents. And for security emergency cases, please approach the designated ODIHR security officer. It is also my pleasure to inform that based on a request from our host, Poland, and that since this year Poland marks the 17th anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising, the Warsaw Uprising Museum offered free entrance for the participants of these meetings. You will need to present your HDIM budget at the ticket office. The information on how to get to the museum, which takes around 10 minutes from here by bus, will be posted outside and available at the information desk and for the duration of the meeting. Finally, I am pleased to announce that several receptions will take place in the next few days. Today, our Polish hosts are offering a reception for all participants at the HDIM this evening at the Polish MFA Palace. ODIHR will host a reception tomorrow at the Bristol at 8 p.m. The incoming Serbian chairmanship is offering its reception on 30th of September at the Platinum Club, and the Swiss chairmanship hosting a reception on 2nd of October at the Sagrada National Gallery. Please bring your IDs with you for those. Having said that, during the whole meeting, ODIHR staff, our team sitting around here, will be available to support you and to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.